So find us on www.channelafrica.co.za. We are on SABC Plus as well as live streaming throughout our various social media platforms. My name is Asanda Beda.
And I'm Peter Ndoro. Thanks so much indeed for tuning in. Let me tell you, it is freezing here in Johannesburg. I don't know where you are across this beautiful continent of ours and in the diaspora, but South Africa is experiencing a cold front. Yes, in winter, a cold front. And it's freezing. And we're told that it's going to get worse. And that it may snow in 8 of the 9 provinces. And so, that's kind of how we're feeling. Stories that we're looking at this hour. The Zambian government is denying that former president died of suspected food poisoning. And President Cyril Ramaphosa is in Canada for the G7 meeting. We'll have more on those stories and others after the news with Jwalane Tulong-Mwepe.
SABC News. The African Perspective.
Thank you, Peter. Good morning. Rwanda has accused the DRC of manipulating other member countries to prevent it from assuming the chairmanship of the Economic Community of Central African States, or ECAS. Kigali announced its departure from the regional bloc meant to promote economic cooperation in Central Africa on Saturday, the same day as the latest ECAS summit. Speaking in a televised interview, Rwanda's Minister for Foreign Affairs, Olivier Nduguhungihere, says the country could not remain a bystander as the DRC continues to manipulate other member countries, accusing ECAS of being dysfunctional.
ECAS accepted to be manipulated by a single country imposing its diktat. It's an issue. This is why we decided to pull out, to withdraw from ECAS, because we cannot stay in a community that is no more working for the interests of its member state, that is working against the law and its own law, actually its own treaty, and is working against its intended purpose of economic integration of the region. ECAS has been a dysfunctional regional economic community, one of the less effective.
Ivory Coast's former Trade Minister Jean-Louis Billion is seeking to represent the opposition Democratic Party of Ivory Coast in the October presidential election. This comes after former Credit Suisse chief Tidjane Thiam was excluded from the final list of candidates last week. Ivory Coast has a history of election-related violence, including a brief civil war after the 2010 presidential contest that killed about 3,000 people. Thiam renounced his French citizenship in February in order to meet eligibility conditions for the election. In an interview with Reuters in the commercial capital Abidjan, Billion blamed party officials for the handling of legal challenges to Thiam's candidacy. South Africa's Sports, Arts and Culture Minister, Gayton McKenzie, has announced a new implementation plan for the collective repatriation of the remains of South African exiles, focusing on SADC countries. McKenzie says the initiative is a moral duty to restore dignity and heal wounds. He added that the process is a way of fixing the injustices caused by apartheid. McKenzie made a call to families of liberation heroes who died in exile to come forward. He addressed the media in Pretoria.
Thousands of our people went into exile during the liberation struggle. Many never came home. Some died unknown, buried in unmarked graves, without their families having the chance to mourn. Why does this matter? The exile repatriation project is about bringing our freedom fighters home. It is a moral duty. We are doing no family a favor. It is a duty, a moral one. It's a national responsibility. These were people who gave everything for our liberation. Everybody in this room and everybody watching, we owe those families a great debt of gratitude.
Meanwhile, the leader of the San and Nama people in South Africa, Petrus Valboy, has hailed the South African government's latest repatriation and reburial efforts as a victory for the nation and turning point for Africa's oldest indigenous communities. Valboy reflected on decades of struggle endured by the San and Nama people since 1969.
Yes, what I struggle and try. From 1969, I've tried my best, but for the first time, the minister is here and the president is nearby. So, a victory for the nation, our oldest nation in the world is coming up. The Sa and the Namal people is coming up. So, I am happy. For the Sa people, it's a very a big victory that we can do our best to clean Africa.
And finally, Russia says it plans to step up cooperation with more African countries, including in sensitive areas such as defense and security. Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov says the Russian presence in Africa is growing with intent to comprehensively develop interaction with more African countries. Russia's growing security role in parts of the continent, including in countries such as Mali, the Central African Republic and Equatorial Guinea, is viewed with concern by the West and has come at the expense of France and the United States. For any news stories you would like to share with us, please do send an email to newsroom@channelafrica.co.za or call us on +27 11 714 4459. For Channel Africa News, I'm Cholani Tulongwebe.
SABC News. The African Perspective.
In our sports headline, Themba Zwane is excited to be representing the African continent at the FIFA Club World Cup with other three counterparts. Italy's Yannick Sinner is still at the top of the ATP World Rankings despite his defeat at the French Open final. I'll be back with these and other stories at the bottom of the hour.
Wake up, Africa. Peter Ndoro and Asanda Beda are here to help you rise and shine. Weekdays, 6 till 9 a.m. Central African Time. Only on Channel Africa.
All right, let's take this moment to thank the team as we get into our roundup. Thanks to Talent Butelezi, that's on our social media. She handles that. Thanks to Jwalani Tulo on news. We have on economics, Tabiso Lehoku on sports, Fikile Lingwati. On technical production is Catherine Maleka today. And our producers are Hlengi Wema Baso, Joey Likhodi and Pumuzo Ramagaza. That's the team that puts it all together. And that's how you get Africa Rise and Shine every morning, 6 till 9, Monday to Friday.
Yes, indeed. And it's time for us to start what we call the Africa Roundup, isn't it? This is, we will take a look at all the top stories that have been playing out across the continent in the last 24 hours. And we do this with our team of reporters and analysts and experts, bringing those stories to us in a concise manner to make sure that you are kept up to date. What's the first story?
Government of Zambia has dispelled allegations that former President Edgar Lungu died of suspected poisoning, and Chief Government Spokesperson Cornelius Mueta has called on leaders in the Patriotic Front not to turn the sad moment into a political springboard.
The allegation of possible poisoning without prejudice to possible findings has got nothing to do whatsoever with the government of the Republic of Zambia. President HH holds and held no grudge whatsoever against the former President Edgar Chagwa Lungu. We therefore, as government, find these renewed and shifting allegations not just alarming and called for, but worrisome and intended to whip the emotions of the support base of the Patriotic Front membership in order to justify the defiance for which their leaders are calling for.
In Côte d'Ivoire, former Trade Minister Jean-Louis Billon has formally announced his intention to run for president under the banner of the opposition PDCI party. His declaration follows the court's disqualification of a prominent technocrat Tidjane Thiam, who lost his Ivorian nationality upon obtaining French citizenship decades ago.
In an interview in the commercial capital Abidjan, Billon asked for the PDCI's support and said it was a pity that Thiam would be excluded.
mais c'est la résultante d'une impréparation.
But it's the result of a lack of preparation on the part of some of the party's executives that led to his elimination. That's why you always have to have several strings to your bow, especially when you're in politics.
Surtout quand on est en politique.
Bion said all the great nations of the world have adopted dual nationality and that thousands of Ivorians have, for various reasons, several nationalities.
Moi, personnellement,
So, of course, I personally will be proposing a law so that dual nationality can be accepted from now on.
désormais, la double nationalité.
The issue of who will carry the mantle of the main opposition party into the election risks adding to tensions in the world's top cocoa producer.
The third United Nations Oceans Conference opened on Monday in Nice, a coastal city in southern France, under the theme of accelerating action and mobilizing all actors to conserve and sustainably use the ocean. Here's UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres speaking at the opening session.
Since the last UN Ocean Conference in Lisbon, we have seen progress. We have also seen a growing awareness of the deep interconnection between preserving biodiversity and marine ecosystems, combating climate change, and stopping pollution. The Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework set a bold pledge to conserve and manage at least 30% of marine and coastal areas by 2030. Member States also adopted the Agreement on Marine Biological Diversity of Areas Beyond National Jurisdiction, a historic breakthrough. I urge all delegations to ratify it and welcome the good news given by President Macron and the momentum this conference is generating towards its swift entry into force.
The UN has allocated emergency funding to help tackle a worsening hunger crisis in northeastern Nigeria. According to the UN's Emergency Relief Coordinator, Tom Fletcher, $6 million has been released from the Central Emergency Response Fund to provide urgent nutritional support in the region, which is experiencing the most severe malnutrition crisis in half a decade.
Our colleagues from the Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs are deeply concerned about the impact of escalating food insecurity in Borno, Adamawa, and Yobe states in the northeast of the country during the lean season between June and August. This year, 1 million children under 5 in these areas are at risk of severe acute malnutrition. That's double last year's figure. The new funding from SURF will help partners meet the most urgent nutrition and health needs of vulnerable people in northeast Nigeria, particularly women and children. Our humanitarian colleagues note that it comes at a critical time as brutal funding cuts by key donors disrupt humanitarian response efforts. In Borno, Adamawa, and Yobe states, these cuts mean humanitarians no longer have the capacity to prevent a further worsening of the situation.
South Africa's President Cyril Ramaphosa will travel to Canada this coming weekend after being invited to attend the G7 Leaders Summit. He is expected to share South Africa's state of readiness to host the G20 later this year.
President Ramaphosa will attend the G7 Leaders Summit in Canada this weekend. He is expected to brief the leaders of the powerful group on state of preparations for the G20 meeting. This is an overlap between G7 and G20, as members of the G7 are also members of G20.
And that's how we come to the end of today's Africa Roundup. We'll have another one for you after the 6 o'clock news. And a great way to start the day. We catch you up in a very concise way, the top stories that have played out in the last 24 hours. Coming up shortly, we'll be going to East Africa with Asanda Beda. She's going to be unpacking with one of our regular commentators the stories that have been making news in the region.
Ahoy, matey!
Captain here to help, right, boys?
Set sail with us on a digital voyage like no other. Channel Africa has a treasure trove of awesomeness. That is our website and social media pages.
Tell me, why are you here?
We want you to be part of our adventure.
The winds are changing, Captain. And this time...
Imagine a world where curiosity knows no bounds, where entertainment meets enlightenment, and where every click leads to the African perspective. Visit us on our website, www.channelafrica.co.za, or follow us on Instagram or on X at Channel Africa 1. Go on, like us on Facebook at Channel Africa 1. So, spread the word. Tell a friend that Channel Africa's online variety is what they need on the web. Channel Africa, the African perspective. Your morning companion with the stories that matter. This is Rise and Shine on Channel Africa.
16 minutes past 6 Central African time. We now look at some of the stories making headlines in the east of the continent. And we speak to Dennis Beru, who is a journalist and head of the Grassroots Journalism Kenya. Dennis, always great having these catch-up sessions with you. Very important. How are you on this Tuesday?
I'm doing good, Asanda. I hope you are well in South Africa.
We well, just feeling cold. I'm sure you can see how I'm dressed, but we're managing. It's very cold. Today,
we have to.
Today, let's start with where you are based, actually, in Kenya. 5 police officers are interdicted in Nairobi after Albert Omondi Ojwang dies in police custody in a Central Police Station, or at Central Police Station. Circumstances around Ojwang's arrest are unclear, but the offense is said to have been false publication or defamation. Who is this man, and what do we know about the work he was doing?
Thank you so much, Asanda. Albert Ojwang, or Albert Omondi Ojwang, a 31-year-old teacher, was forcefully arrested, but as per the police statement, he was lawfully arrested at his home in Kaspul Kabondo, that is 350 kilometers away from Nairobi, and he was transported from his home in the Nyanza, which is now the western part of Kenya, to Nairobi. The questions are, why was he transported 350 kilometers to Nairobi, where we have a police station where he was arrested? And the questions also surrounding why was he and who ordered for his transfer from that is Nyanza, that is Kabondo to Nairobi. And remember, according to the Inspector General of the Police, said that he is being accused of tarnishing the name of Deputy Inspector of Police. And it is the case has really sparked outrage here in Kenya, and we have seen so many activists and Kenyan at large trying to condemn what really happened, because the information that the police gave out, it is not really adding up, as most of the activists have been trying to call out government, because this is not the first incident to happen.
For how long do we know that he was in police custody before his death? And we know that you are joined by another guest. If we welcome you as well, Anami Daudi, who is a human rights activist and coordinator at Mukuru Social Justice Center in Kenya. Welcome to Africa Rise and Shine. You'll come in as we go along in this chat, I guess. But how long was he in police custody before his death?
Thank you. Thank you for this opportunity. My name is Anami Daudi. I'm from Mukuru Community Justice Center and Kongamano la Mapinduzi, a social justice and political activist here in Kenya. Ojwang was arrested on Saturday from Migori, where he was transported to Nairobi Central Police Station on Friday. On Saturday, was transported on Saturday. Then his body and his family knew his death on Sunday at Central Police Station. And just the way Dennis had mentioned, the government has been using this tactic of abducting, arresting, and also disappearing people who are criticizing the government on social media. If your family member, or maybe if anyone around you doesn't raise an alarm, now you'll be maybe be found maybe in the rivers, quarries, or maybe be killed somewhere else. And the complainant of this case is such a senior person who is very, very close to the executive, which is the Deputy Inspector General. Is an ally of the President of the Republic of Kenya. And is the person of interest. But the hypocrisy that we saw yesterday is that as even the police were issuing statement, actually was part of the press conference, which we, the people of Kenya, doesn't believe or don't believe that justice will be served because now they are targeting junior police officers. He was transferred from Migori to Nairobi, which we believe he was tortured on his way because there are so many police stations that they pass by from Migori to Nairobi because the law says here in Kenya that when you're arrested, you're supposed to be presented to the nearest police station. And also, if you have done anything wrong, you can be presented to court, so that in a court of law, so that they can produce the charges and everything, so that they can also prosecute you. But what happened here is an illegal, which we saw with Njeri last week.
Yeah.
That he was also forcibly arrested without knowing the charges, and also the charges were just the same. Publication of false information on social media. And he was detained also at Pangani Police Station, where we also occupied Pangani Police Station. He was denied cash bail or maybe police bond, so that she can go and have time with her family, because it was on holiday. And also they present him to court the day that the courts were operational. But police refused to release him because they said, I'm quoting, orders from above. They have said we should not release her.
Well, it's a very disturbing story there, and hoping that the Independent Policing Oversight Authority, as they continue with their investigations, I know Kenyans are not convinced that this was going to be in the interest of the public, and that it's going to be impartial and it will be done thoroughly. But let's hope that it does shift, at least at some stage. We need to leave it there on that chat, Anami. Thank you so much for joining us as we continue with Dennis. Dennis, let's move to Tanzania's president now, Samia Suluhu Hassan, who's joined fellow Tanzanians in mourning the deaths of a tragic road accident that claimed the lives of 28 people there in Tanzania. 8 others were injured. She sent her message of condolences, but what is she saying in terms of road safety and improving road conditions in high-risk areas there?
Thank you so much, Asanda. This is one of the most crucial and fatal accidents in Tanzania to be witnessed recently. And in her condolences message, the head of state directed the Tanzanian National Roads Agency, that is a TAN Roads and Rural and Urban Roads Agency, TARURA, to urgently improve the conditions of roads, particularly in high-risk areas, to ensure that there is safety for all road users. And remember, this accident occurred the night of Saturday, June the 7th, at Iwambi Hills along Tanzania-Zambia highway in Mbeya region. And I remember the region has had minor accidents that happened, but this one claiming at least 28 lives is one of the most fatal road accidents in Tanzania. I remember already 19 bodies have been identified, while 9 remain unidentified, and additionally 6 people including men and 2 women sustained serious injuries. I remember Tanzania is one of the countries in East Africa to have good road networks, especially towards the border of her countries. And I remember these accidents comes at a time when Tanzania is trying to cripple with a poor road of state of in part of the rural areas, and he has directed the agency to ensure that all roads have been maintained. And remember, this is also a time Tanzania is heading to the elections, and some of the people, especially from the opposition regions, feels that some of the regions where roads need to be maintained are in a very poor state. And now I know the call will be to ensure that at least roads are maintained, so that when it comes to electioneering a time, now things will be easy. Remember, I had one of the members from the main opposition party saying that some of the regions have been neglected in terms of development. So yet some of the regions that are now pro government, they have a good road network.
How much of truck driver negligence contributed to the incident? We know it was the accident between a truck and 3 other vehicles. The truck driver is said to have lost control as he was descending.
Yes. You see, most of the goods are being transported from Tanzania to the neighboring countries, that is Zambia. And there were also some calls that, some of the truck drivers who have been reckless, they do not follow the road rules in Tanzania. And these accident that involved the so-called transit, the town transit from Tanzania to Zambia, the 2 that were involved in this accident. And there also we have some calls from the authorities that some of the licenses of these trucks might be revoked to ensure that they comply with the rules and regulations.
Another one to look at,
yes.
Over and above road safety, looking at truck driver negligence as well as behavior on the roads. Let's move to Chad before we run out of time now, Dennis. Chad has responded to the U.S.'s President Donald Trump's travel ban by saying that it will stop granting visas to U.S. citizens. Sudan, Chad and Somalia have expressed disbelief at these travel bans, and this is how Chad is responding. How exactly does this immigration crackdown work, according to Trump? How does he make sense of it in terms of how Africa can respond?
Yeah, officials and leaders from these countries feel that, this is very unfair because the sweeping travel ban that Trump's administration has intensified on the immigration crackdown, they feel this is not fair because banning 12 countries or citizens from 12 countries from participating or visiting the U.S., Chad and Somalia and other countries feel that, this is very unfair. And remember, Sudan also had to come in and saying that, of course, we know we are trying to fight terrorism, and we've also been included in the list. I remember the official from Sudan saying that, Sudan is a least a terrorist country, yet Trump has also included the country. And remember, this ban is also expansive to other countries. We've seen Afghanistan, we've seen Haiti, Iran, Libya, and also Yemen citizens are being included in this. And now, surprisingly, we have Burundi, Cuba, Laos, and Sierra Leone. And I remember that Asanda, during Trump's first administration, that was 2017 to 2021, he also banned Muslim majority nations from visiting the US, saying that it is one of the ways of combating terrorists and trying to show that
and that previous ban faced a challenge in court. The U.S. Supreme Court did uphold the ban, but then when President Joe Biden took over from Trump, he repealed that upholding. Can we expect another court challenge in this one?
Of course, we are expecting court battles on the same. I remember the ban was effected as of yesterday, that is Monday. And we are waiting to see whether these will be effected. And remember, when President of Chad, Hamad Idris Diaby, saying that he has instructed the officials of the immigration to ensure that no American citizen will be granted a visa to Chad. I'm also expecting that other countries will also do the same. Now I think these will make sure that at least Trump will now loosen the
restrictions. All right, we're completely out of time, Dennis. Thank you so much for your time. We appreciate it. Dennis Mberude joining us as a journalist and head of the Grassroots Journalism Kenya as we look at some of the stories making headlines in the East. Also earlier on that first story involving Kenya, Anami Daudi, a human rights activist and coordinator at Mukuru Social Justice Center in Kenya, lent his voice to the conversation. It's 32 minutes past 6 now. Let's say good morning to Jwalani Tulongwe. She has our news headlines.
SABC News headlines. The African perspective.
Thank you, Asanda. Good morning. Making headlines, Rwanda has accused the DRC of manipulating other member countries to prevent it from assuming the chairmanship of the Economic Community of Central African States, or ECAS. Ivory Coast's former Trade Minister Jean-Louis Billion is seeking to represent the opposition Democratic Party of Ivory Coast in the October presidential election. This comes after former Credit Suisse chief Tijani Tiam was excluded from the final list of candidates last week. And finally, California's Governor Gavin Newsom says an additional 2,000 National Guard troops are to be sent to Los Angeles following a third day of clashes between protesters and security forces over immigration raids. I will have details on these and other stories at 7 o'clock.
News headlines. The African perspective.
Time now to take a first look at what's been happening in the world of sport as we say good morning to Fikile Lingwati.
Sports on Channel Africa. The African perspective.
Thank you, Peter. Good morning, guys. Let's start off with football news. Africa will have 4 representatives at this year's FIFA Club World Cup in the USA. The teams include Al Ahly of Egypt, Esperance Sportive de Tunis of Tunisia, Mamelodi Sundowns South Africa, and Wydad AC Morocco. The tournament takes place between the 14th of June and the 13th of July. Sundowns attacking midfielder Themba Zwane says it's exciting, especially with 4 teams now being able to represent the African continent.
It feels great. We just give hope to the other teams that in Africa that is doable. We hopefully next time we have more numbers that are going that side to represent the African and as a nation, and we're so excited.
Portuguese superstar Cristiano Ronaldo seems set to remain with Saudi Arabian club Al Nassr. The 40-year-old forward is out of contract at the end of this month, and although sources have told media that they are confident of extending his deal, there has still been speculation over his future. The former Real Madrid, Juventus and Manchester United striker last week posted a cryptic message on social media hinting he was set to leave the club he joined in January 2023. But speaking after the Portugal's dramatic Nations League victory over Spain on Sunday, he suggested he would not be moving on. And South Africa's long-distance running star Yvette van Zyl has described her debut at the Comrades Marathon as one of the toughest races of her illustrious career. The 4-time Soweto Marathon champion tackled the 98th edition of the iconic 89th kilometer down run from Pietermaritzburg to Durban's People's Park as a novice on Sunday. Despite the challenge, she delivered a remarkable performance, finishing 4th in a time of 6 hours, 11 minutes and 35 seconds. Her effort earned her a gold medal and $9,000 in prize money. Van Zyl reflected on the tough conditions, noting that the race began in darkness at 5:45 a.m. Central African Time, making visibility difficult amid the crowd of 22,000 runners.
Yeah, it was hard. It was really hard. There's not a lot of races that I've done that took me through such hard times. So yeah, it was. Yeah, from the start, I just didn't feel that poppy as what I hoped to feel. Just felt a bit flat from the start, but I thought it will, like, it's only the heels that makes me feel that way because there's a lot of heels at the start. But yeah, through halfway I had some stomach issues and.
The 4-time Olympic marathon runner told SABC Sport that she had expected to finish in 6th place and was surprised to end up in 4th.
Yeah, well, I thought I'm going to finish 6th until I got the photos of my two boys. Then I moved up 2 places. So, yeah, and the last place I moved up was like in the last kilometer before the finish. So that was good because she had a 4-minute gap on me, so I closed it down quite quickly. So, yeah, it was, I really wanted to podium if everything went well, but I knew the competition was a bit tough, and I was, with athletes, was experience of running for, so that I knew was to my disadvantage because I didn't know how my body would react running so far.
For any sports stories you'd like to share with us, please send an email to newsroom@channelafrica.co.za or call us on +2711 714 4459. This is Channel Africa Sport with me, Fide Lungwati.
Sports on Channel Africa. The African perspective.
Hello, Africa. We would love to hear your voice on our radio station. Be part of the fun and send a shout out or greeting message to your loved ones and your favorite Channel Africa presenters. Whether you're in Africa, the diaspora, or anywhere else around the globe, we want to hear your voice. Send your shout out message by sending an email to info@channelafrica.co.za or send them to our Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram pages. Help us diversify our sound with your voice. Channel Africa, the African perspective.
Start your day informed, inspired, and entertained. Asanda and Peter bring you Rise and Shine. Weekdays, 6 till 9 a.m. Central African Time.
Let's find out what's happening in the world of business. Here's our economics update with Tabiso Lehuku.
Business news on Channel Africa. The African perspective.
Thanks, Asanda, and good morning. South Africa's President Cyril Ramaphosa will embark on a visit to the presidential youth flagship programs in Pretoria this morning. Ramaphosa will engage with the youth beneficiaries of the Presidential Youth Employment Intervention and Presidential Employment Flagship programs. He will visit Sefako Mahatu Primary School in Saulsville, the South African Creative Industries Incubator in Eersterust, and the Foundation for Professional Development in Pretoria East. Sibahle Mota reports.
President Ramaphosa says today's visits will highlight innovative implementation models and public-private partnerships that are delivering dignified high-quality employment and skilling outcomes for the youth. Ramaphosa will interact directly with youth beneficiaries, educators and implementing partners and see firsthand how the programs are reshaping labor market access for the country's most excluded youth.
The CEO of the Southern African Agri-Initiative, Francois Rousseau, says government should take greater measures in dealing with the outbreak of foot-and-mouth disease. He says if left unchecked, the outbreak will mean that farmers will no longer be able to move their cattle or pay workers' wages. Rousseau says having to order vaccines from other countries shows that South Africa is ill-prepared to deal with veterinary diseases. He added this will also affect consumers because the price of red meat will shoot up.
The biggest knock is, of course, immediately to the farmers as they are unable to deliver to this facility, and of course all our exports to China have been immediately halted. This will now cause, in the very short term, increase of red meat onto the shelves, which will mean lower prices in the short term, and then in the longer term, as farmers keep their weaner calves away because of this lack of being able to deliver and the lower prices, it will mean an increase in prices in the longer term.
The mobilization of capital in South Africa and on the African continent into greener and more resilient economies will be one of the key focus areas at the SADC Sustainable Finance Forum. The 3-day meeting is underway in Cape Town in the Western Cape Province. The International Finance Corporation, the IFC, and Banking Association of South Africa are among those who will identify obstacles and solutions to sustainable finance in the region. The IFC's regional manager for upstream and advisory services, Paul Philippi.
Our aim here is to mobilize necessary capital for sustainable and inclusive economic growth in Southern Africa. So in a way, this conference is a milestone because it brings together key stakeholders in sustainable finance from around the SADC region for the very first time. We had a similar conference last year, but was mainly was really focused on only South Africa. So that's the big change that we're doing for this year.
Cocoa farmers in Ivory Coast say soil moisture is helping the April to September mid crop to develop across most of Ivory Coast's main cocoa growing regions, adding that they hoped for a mix of rain and sunshine to boost growth even more. Ivory Coast, the world's top cocoa producer, is in its rainy season, which runs officially from April to mid-November, when rains are abundant and often heavy. Although beans continue leaving the bush, growers fear a drop in quality. The farmers say if the weather remains adequate, with a good mix of sun and rain until late June, it will help the last stage of the mid-crop. Pfizer and other drug companies met with the Trump administration on Monday to discuss lowering U.S. drug prices. CEO of Pfizer, Albert Bourla, says no commitments had been made. President Donald Trump last month issued an executive order directing drug makers to lower the prices of their medicines to align with what other countries pay. According to the order, the administration was set most favored nations price targets within 30 days. The Department of Health and Human Services has said it expects drug makers in the U.S. to set prices for their products at the lowest price paid by other high-income countries. $1 in Nigeria is trading at 1,000 naira 459. Botswana 13 pula 23. Kenya 128 shilling 41. And Zambia 24 kwacha 76. The BRICS countries in Brazil, the dollar there will cost you 5 real 56. Russia 78 rubles 82. India 85 rupees 66. China 71 18. And in South Africa the dollar will cost you 17 rand 72. $1 is trading at 73 pence to the British pound and 87 to the euro. Commodities markets: gold $3,306, platinum $1,012 per ounce, Brent crude oil is at $67.33 a barrel. For any business stories you would like to share with us, please send us an email to newsroom@channelafrica.co.za or call us on +27 11 714 4459. For Channel Africa Business in Johannesburg, I'm Thabisolo Huku.
Business news on Channel Africa. The African perspective. G20 in Africa, exclusive to Channel Africa.
It's time now for our G20 fact for the morning. Did you know that South Africa will hand over the G20 presidency to the United States at the summit's scheduled to sit in Johannesburg in November, concluding a 3-year cycle of forums headed by countries of the South? That's India, Brazil and South Africa. And that is our G20 fact for today.
G20 in Africa, exclusive to Channel Africa. championing Africa through solidarity, equality, and sustainability.
It's 6:45 Central African Time. Good morning, and this is Rise and Shine on Channel Africa. If you've just joined us, the South African Reserve Bank is currently working to determine the risk of climate change on the financial sector. Speaking in Stellenbosch, South Africa last week, Deputy Governor Fundi Chazibana says central banks don't know enough about the long-term costs of climate change. In South Africa, the SARB has conducted stress tests on the banking sector and will be moving towards insurance to assess the risks that might better inform decisions on monetary policy. Timakadzo Lishoro has the details.
Climate change adaptation is estimated to cost sub-Saharan African economies between $30 and $50 billion annually over the next decade. This is between 2 to 3% of GDP for the region as it seeks to deal with the effects of climate-related events like drought and floods. Climate-related events are inflationary and driving up insurance claims. Deputy Governor at the South African Reserve Bank and CEO of the bank's Prudential Authority, Fundi Chazibana, says common stress tests would allow all banks and insurance companies to outline scenarios on how they would respond to financial stress brought on by climate change.
This year we put out our first common stress test where we allow all of the banks to tell us how would they respond to a climate stress test. We're going to progress that to go to the insurance sector. So we're trying to anticipate the risks as they might come. The third intervention has been to give guidance to financial institutions because this is a new body of work. So the JSE has got a set of requirements in terms of how they would like South African companies to report on their own initiative. We are looking at the risk exposures. Now, the risk exposures do not sit in the financial institutions themselves. They are the risk exposures of their clients, which affect the credit that these financial institutions extend, which affect the types of claims that they might receive on the insurance side.
She said the cost of floods in 2022 in the KwaZulu-Natal province rose to $3 billion, while severe droughts increased food prices as much as 10 percentage points, increasing overall inflation by 3 percentage points. Up to 60% of the country's banks' loan books had credit risk exposure to borrowers with climate-related risks.
What is different about climate-related risks is that they can be multifaceted. They can have an impact on inflation, they can have an impact on credit risk exposures, they can have an impact on insurance claims, they can have an impact on things like tourism numbers. We saw that in Cape Town when you had the drought. When we start to look at economic costs, you will have a layer of economic costs that comes to the inflation numbers, you will have a set of issues that have got financial stability impact. So it's not an economic shock like a financial shock.
She added that climate change denialism would lead to unpreparedness in mitigation and adaptation strategies and would have snowballing effects on government expenditure and economic growth.
You will see in the climate scenarios we talk about orderly management of risks and disorderly, because that's where your worst case scenario looks like, is if things are disorderly, if we are all denialists and we say, well, there's no climate change, and therefore I don't have to do anything. And so there are no mitigants in place, and we don't have strategies for adaptation, meaning when the risk arises, we're all scrambling and we say, oh, this is what has happened. We saw in South Africa how those types of risks could materialize, because when we had the floods in KZN, we had a number of things that were there. Okay, the insurers could manage their piece because nothing broke the bank. But we realized when we had to look at actual funding mechanism. So there was a bridge here today, but there's no bridge tomorrow. Let's assume that a municipality is responsible for fixing the bridge. The municipality looks, we don't have money. Okay, fine. So we go to the next layer. We go to the province. Is the money? The province says, oh, even we don't have space. Then national government has to step in. We were very lucky because national government has got provisions that they could utilize. But this was just a small part of one province. Imagine now if this is happening across the country in multiple ways, would we be able to manage? So it does give us things to reflect on. Then the disorderly scenario then comes with extra layers of other economic costs, because what happens is that the opportunity costs will become larger. Things that you were supposed to do, because you now have this situation that is urgent, you get this displacement.
Chazibana says there are conversations that might create space for a blended finance approach to dealing with adaptation, adding that South Africa, in its capacity as chair of the G20 this year, has tasked the International Insurance Association as well as the World Bank to do some work on the risks of climate change. For Channel Africa News, I'm Dimagato Leshoro in Johannesburg.
Now, the inaugural policy dialogue in entrepreneurship education kicked off in Johannesburg in South Africa. The high-level dialogue aims to ignite a cross-sector conversation on embedding entrepreneurship education into the basic education system, and it brought together key stakeholders from national and provincial government departments, the private sector, civil society, as well as academic institutions to co-create a unified vision for entrepreneurship as a key lever for youth empowerment. There's more from Elijah Mhlanga, who's the head of communication at the Department of Basic Education.
This dialogue is very important because we need to now focus as a country on entrepreneurship, not just learners who are going to be employees. We need now to say, what is it that we need to do to make sure that we equip our young people for the future world of work? In fact, not so much even in the future, because AI is here. When we started this equip thing, education, employability and entrepreneurship, AI was not there in the way that it has now taken over. It shows how fast the world is changing, and that we need to do all that we can to make sure that our young children are equipped with the skills that they need for them to be able to either get good employment or for them to be able to create employment and become entrepreneurs. So we are here with our partners because this is not something that the department on its own can do. You need the business sector to come on board to say, this is what we want from you as the education sector. Give our young people the experience and the skills that they can meet our needs. And what we say are our needs are actually the needs of the country. So that collaboration is absolutely critical. That's why we said, let's get together, all our partners that are involved on these matters, let's talk and find a way to develop policy that will ensure that the country goes on a different trajectory, one that is going to focus on entrepreneurship, not just for people to be employed.
And why entrepreneurship? Why was that important for the department to solely focus on that?
Well, for the most part, when the country's economy is not doing well, education gets the blame, because they say you are educating and producing learners who are not equipped. They cannot cope with the needs of industry. So we said, what does industry need? And then we started collaborating. The curriculum that we've now done with the new subjects that we've introduced in school is informed by what industry said will be required. So we are now responding directly to the needs of industry. That's why if you look at the subjects that we have, they are more focused on equipping young people with skills. You've got science, you've got automotive engineering, you've got civil technology, you've got construction, you've got engineering, graphic design. All of those things that industry said this is what is required for the country's development. But this is your role as education, to make sure that you avail this as early as possible in school. So all these initiatives that we are putting in place in terms of policy changes, strengthening ECD, strengthening grade R, making sure that the foundation phase is strong in terms of the recruitment of good quality teachers, we are doing to prepare our young people for the later grades where they begin to make choices about what they need. So when they get there, they need to be comfortable with any career that they can find, whether you want to do the sciences, whether you want to do the economics, but you need to have done maths, you need to be strong in it, you need to have done some science, you need to have actually taken subjects that will direct you to a career of your choice.
That was Elijah Mhlanga, who's the head of communications at the Department of Basic Education here in South Africa. And he was talking to our reporter Nhlanhla Mahlangu.
In a joint statement released in May, the United States and China agreed to significantly ease trade tensions by slashing tariffs imposed since April, resulting in a 115% decrease on both sides. Only a 10% base rate on reciprocal tariffs remains, and China is also committed to dropping its non-tariff countermeasures. But with this truce set to last just 90 days, the global market remains on edge. So, what risks and opportunities lie ahead for African economies as supply chains shift once again? And what to expect from the US-China trade talks? Channel Africa's business reporter Innocent Samosa has the answers.
After 3 months of US-China trade war, the two nations declared a pause. The deal establishes a mechanism for bilateral talks on trade and economic matters for 90 days. However, long-term peace is not guaranteed. What happens next? Lana de Clever is from Africa International Advisors.
The 90-day tariff pause between the United States and China offers little clarity and even less certainty. While it may ease immediate trade tensions, the underlying divisions over industrial policy, strategic technology, and global influence remain firmly intact. For African economies, the pause is less an opportunity for industrial expansion and more a reminder of the volatility characterizing the global trading system. The risk for Africa is twofold. First, the continent could again become a passive recipient of global trade disruptions. If China redirects its export surpluses to global south markets, African manufacturers may find themselves competing with an influx of underpriced goods.
She says African economies faces structural question.
How do I build resilience in the absence of predictable global order? The most credible answer may lie with the continent itself. Deepening regional integration through mechanisms like the Free Trade Agreement and building cross-border value chains could offer for African firms a more stable and controllable path forward.
But how might the easing of tariffs between the US and China impact African exporters who have stepped into supply gaps during the trade war? Could these gains now be reversed? De Clever explains.
African exporters who briefly benefited from the US-China tensions might find their gains difficult to defend as the two superpowers ease tariff restrictions. During the peak of the trade dispute, some African sectors managed to fill disrupted supply lines, but these shifts were largely opportunistic rather than foundational. As tariffs roll back, Chinese exporters are poised to re-enter global markets with greater competitiveness, often supported by subsidies and large-scale logistics. For African firms, many of which operate with thinner margins and infrastructure constraints, the risk of being displaced is high.
She foresees a stronger competition for African goods in global markets because of China agreeing to remove non-tariff barriers.
The fact that the US could secure a temporary suspension through bilateral pressure, while African countries have struggled for years to ease similar barriers, underscores the asymmetry in leverage and responsiveness. This isn't just a matter of scale, it reflects the hierarchy of strategic importance. The NTB easings, while unrelated to Africa in scope, offers a clear signal. In a fragmented global trading environment, access is not governed by inclusion in multilateral norms.
For Channel Africa News, I am Innocent Samosa in Johannesburg.
Right, it is 7 o'clock Central African time, which means it's time for the second hour of the program. Thanks so much indeed for tuning in. You're listening to Channel Africa's Rise and Shine, where we bring you the African perspective, broadcasting from our very chilly studios here in Johannesburg, South Africa. Asanda, Beda.
Good morning. Yes, and thank you for joining us. If you've just done that, do get in touch with us on our social media platforms. Our handles are at Channel Africa 1. That is on Instagram, on TikTok, on LinkedIn, on X, and on Facebook. We are Channel Africa.
Yeah, coming up this hour, we're going to be taking a look at a couple of issues, and one of them, the price of red meat could become expensive for many households in South Africa. And we'll also be looking at world leaders who'll be attending the UN Ocean Conference, which is underway in France. So there's just two of the big stories that we'll be looking at in this particular hour. Stay with us, so we'll have all this and more after the news with Onere. I give up.
Jwalane Tulongwepe, and then Fikile Lingwati will follow
I'm getting
with
old.
the sports headlines.
I'm getting old.
SABC News. SABC News. The African Perspective.
Thank you, Peter. Good morning. Rwanda has accused the DRC of manipulating other member countries to prevent it from assuming the chairmanship of the Economic Community of Central African States, or ECAS. Kigali announced its departure from the regional bloc meant to promote economic cooperation in Central Africa on Saturday, the same day as the latest ECAS summit. Speaking in a televised interview, Rwanda's Minister for Foreign Affairs, Olivier Nduhungihere, says the country could remain a bystander as the DRC continues to manipulate other countries, accusing ECAS of being dysfunctional.
ECAS accepted to be manipulated by a single country imposing its diktat. It's an issue. This is why we decided to pull out, to withdraw from ECAS, because we cannot stay in a community that is no more working for the interests of its member states, that is working against the law and its own law, actually its own treaty, and is working against its intended purpose of economic integration of the region. ECAS has been a dysfunctional regional economic community, one of the less effective.
Ivory Coast former Trade Minister Jean-Louis Billion is seeking to represent the opposition Democratic Party of Ivory Coast in the October presidential election. This comes after former Credit Suisse chief Tidjani Thiam was excluded from the final list of candidates last week. Ivory Coast has a history of election-related violence, including a brief civil war after the 2010 presidential contest that killed about 3,000 people. Thiam renounced his French citizenship in February in order to meet eligibility conditions for the election. In an interview with Reuters in the commercial capital Abidjan, Billion blamed party officials for the handling of legal challenges to Thiam's candidacy. South Africa's Sports, Arts and Culture Minister Gayton McKenzie has announced the reburial of 58 Khoi and San ancestral remains originating from the Northern Cape province. This comes as the department launched phase 2 of government's repatriation efforts to bring back the remains of South African exiles, as well as those of Khoi and San being held outside the country. Minister McKenzie says they are in talks with the institutions across the globe to ensure that the return of the Khoi and San remains to their ancestral homes.
For generations, the remains of South Africa's first people, the Khoi, San, and other indigenous groups were stolen from their graves. These ancestors were treated like objects and as objects. They were displayed in museums, studied in labs, and held in foreign institutions without consent or respect. We are correcting those injustices now.
Meanwhile, the leader of the San and Nama people in South Africa, Petrus Valboy, has hailed the South African government's latest repatriation and burial efforts as a victory for the nation and turning point for Africa's oldest indigenous communities. Valboy reflected on decades of struggle enjoyed by the San and Nama people since 1969.
Years what I struggle and try. From 1969, I've tried my best, but for the first time, the minister is here and the president is nearby. So, a victory for the nation, our oldest nation in the world is coming up. The Sa and the Namal people is coming up. So, I am happy. For the Sa people, it's a very big victory that we can do our best to clean Africa.
And finally, California's Governor Gavin Newsom says an additional 2,000 National Guard troops are to be sent to Los Angeles following a third day of clashes between protesters and security forces over immigration raids. Newsom said only about 300 of an earlier deployment of 2,000 were being used, leaving others in federal buildings without orders. Marines are also being sent in. The BBC's Sarah Smith has the details.
The Pentagon says that 700 Marines are being deployed to Los Angeles to help protect federal personnel and property. But the move is being viewed by state officials in California as an escalation in the battle between the Trump administration and the state over how to police the ongoing protests. The California governor, Democrat Gavin Newsom, has called the move deranged and un-American. He told MSNBC last night that the presence of the National Guard had inflamed what had been small local protests. Mr. Newsom has also rejected Donald Trump's suggestion that he should be arrested, saying this threat was an unmistakable step towards authoritarianism.
For any news stories you would like to share with us, please do send an email to newsroom@channelafrica.co.za or call us on +27 11 714 4459. For Channel Africa News, I'm Cholani Tulongwepe.
SABC News. The African Perspective.
In a sports headline, Malawi national football team take on Angola in a must-win COSAFA in Bloemfontein today. And Beatrice Chebet promised to smash 5,000-meter world record after her narrow miss in Rome. I'll be back with these and other stories at the bottom of the hour.
Start your day informed, inspired, and entertained. Asanda and Peter bring you Rise and Shine. Weekdays, 6 till 9 a.m. Central African Time.
The price of red meat could become more expensive for many households in South Africa. This as the country has been battling to contain the outbreaks of foot and mouth disease for several years. The foot and mouth disease is common among cattle, sheep and goat and is characterized by fever and blister-like sores on the tongue and lips. This after one of the country's biggest feedlots in Heidelberg in the Gauteng province halted production due to an outbreak of the foot and mouth disease at its facilities. Notando Makutulela reports.
Karen Beef is South Africa's largest feedlot. It is reported that the beef company slaughters approximately 2,000 cattle daily. The beef company recently reported a foot and mouth disease outbreak at one of its facilities in Heidelberg, east of Johannesburg. The company says, apart from the KwaZulu-Natal outbreak back in December, this is one of the biggest knock in the red meat industry. Southern African Agri-Initiative CEO Francois Rousseau says due to this incident, red meat consumers may expect to pay more for red meat in the long run.
Currently, we know there is a very big disaster management area in the KwaZulu-Natal area, which has been there since December because of the amount of outbreaks that are reported there, almost just over 150. But the Heidelberg incident was a real knock to the system, and that is why you are seeing such urgency, is because, you know, this is a very reputable feedlot with extremely good biosecurity controls, and it also affects a lot of farmers downstream as they deliver to this facility. The biggest knock is, of course, immediately to the farmers as they are unable to deliver to this facility, and of course all our exports to China have been immediately halted. This will now cause in the very short term, a increase of red meat onto the shelves, which will mean lower prices in the short term, and then in the longer term, as farmers keep their weaner calves away, because of this lack of being able to deliver and the lower prices, it will mean an increase in prices in the longer term.
Karen Beef says the first outbreak at its facilities was recorded on the 30th of May this year. The company says While this is a setback on its export business, South African red meat lovers can rest assured that there will still be supply. Karen Beef Senior Feedlot Veterinarian Dr. Kirk Verwoerd.
The exports are of secondary consideration for us. Our first priority is our own people. We first have to feed our own nation. Our own food security is more important. So yes, our own exports were cancelled immediately. The Heidelberg facility was our export registered feedlot, and that stopped immediately. But I think consumers would like to know whether they will have access to meat, access to the same quality meats, the same safety, everything. And this is where we can assure you that even though the wheels are turning a little bit slower from our other facilities, Pietermaritzburg as well as at Nigel, we will be slaughtering. We are slaughtering every day, but the volumes are less.
All right, let's discuss this further now as we joined on the line by Francois Rousseau. He is CEO of Southern Africa Agricultural Initiative. Francois, a very good morning to you, and thank you for making time for us on Africa Rise and Shine.
Good morning, it's a pleasure to be here.
As we say, the country has been battling with foot and mouth disease control for years now. I think by this time of the year, we know it's going to happen. There will be an outbreak. So what are we missing then in terms of prevention to alleviate the negative impacts of foot and mouth disease?
Yeah, I think this is something very important to discuss, as there are several factors that should be looked at. The first one is we have a weakness in biosecurity controls, and it's getting worse each and every year. We did not see these types of outbreaks of foot and mouth disease, avian influenza, and what we also saw in the pork industry in years prior to 2000 and before that. The second one is ineffective implementation of regulations. South Africa really has good regulations and measures in place when it comes to these type of outbreaks, but the problem is that these type of regulations need to be policed and need to be enforced. Then we have a challenge with the DMAs, or the disaster disease management areas, about policing the movement of animals. This is not just a Department of Agriculture problem. Yes, they have to manage it, and they have to make sure that they are in control of the project. But we also do need the police. We do need the army to assist with getting blockades on the road to ensure that sick animals do not leave the DMAs. Then, because of these DMAs, we've got farmer desperation. A farmer who's now not able to move his cattle because of an FMD DMA area cannot get an income. So we are creating criminals out of these farmers who need to create an income, and they are desperately trying to move their cattle from a disease-ridden area into a non-disease-ridden area to slaughter that animals. And we urgently need to find them a solution within their area to solve this problem. We have a lack. Sorry.
Yeah, yes, go on. Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, we've still got a lot of them, and mainly the biggest one of them being the fact that we are not producing our own vaccines anymore. This is it's really such an embarrassment that we have an institution like Onderstepoort Biological Products, who was the best in Africa, and now we are actually buying all our vaccines from Botswana.
Mm. Can we trace back in terms of how this foot and mouth disease made its way into this Heidelberg Gauteng farm? Usually, or in previous years and cases, farmers that were closer to the Kruger National Park were the ones to be seen as high risk. It's now in Gauteng.
Yeah, you see, and that's the major concern. If it broke out in a facility like Heidelberg, who has very strict biosecurity controls, but we see prior to that, the disease was in KwaZulu-Natal, where it's still rampant. There's still, out of the 288 cases that were reported after 2021, 154 of them came out of KwaZulu-Natal. Then we saw the outbreak in the Eastern Cape, where this type of disease is much worse on dairy cattle than it is on normal cattle. So it's already spreading throughout the country, but we are not able to determine exactly where it came from. But you are correct. The red zone is in Limpopo, because that's where it originated, because it comes originally from buffalo in the Kruger National Park.
Mm. How do we treat foot and mouth disease in the cases? Some cases we know it's fatal.
Yeah, look, out of the 4,500 cattle that were infected at Heidelberg, there was not one mortality. So the problem is just, because of the sores on the feet and on the mouth, the cattle just don't eat as much, so the conditioning is very poor. But again, it's safe for people, and we do have vaccinations that they will now be purchasing from Botswana. But again, because this is not local strains that we are buying or producing ourselves, the protection will be for 3 months instead of where, if we produced it successfully in South Africa, it would have been 6 to 12 months.
So it was in a feedlot that it spread, and feedlots are seen as very crucial when it comes to animal nutrition, especially because they are for increased weight gain, especially with the cattle. That's going to be more money if the cattle weighs more and it's got more weight. So, and
Yes.
also a feedlot is seen as a more controlled environment in terms of how you feed your animals. Does this now outbreak point to maybe a fact that the feedlots aren't as controlled as we thought and we previously believed them to be? And what biosecurity measures do farmers need to now implement?
Yeah, so first of all, I think there are 3 crucial places. The spread of foot and mouth disease is when cattle travel, because it's a highly communicable disease, and it's based on touch, and it can even be with infected hay. So when a farmer takes his cattle to a feedlot or to an abattoir or to an auction, that is the crucial points of contact, and that is why we need to have 2 things in place. Good biosecurity controls. You need to wash off all of the dirt and all of the spores of the disease when you leave your farm, and not necessarily when you enter a farm. That is also good, but then you're washing it down on where the farm is. When you leave the farm, you need to wash down your tires, you need to wash down the back of your bakkie or your trailer or whatever you're using to transport it with. And then the second thing we urgently need in South Africa is we need a traceability system, a digital traceability system that also accounts for the documentation, the health declarations that are accompanying these cattle. And then the most importantly, the third one, which I've already mentioned, is we need blockades enforced by police or the military. That is the only thing that will stop this thing immediately.
Once it has a spread or there's an outbreak, how long does it typically take to remove and deal with? Granted that, of course, some stock will be lost, but when one can expect to resume production usually takes how long?
Yeah, well, once they've vaccinated, I think first they need to quarantine and make sure that the outbreak doesn't move any further from that facility or the DMA in KwaZulu-Natal or any other of the areas which they believe to be infected. Once they've quarantined that and they've vaccinated, then you are able to only slaughter after 90 days. So that will be the process. But at the current moment, there was an operations center put up yesterday by industry bodies, which will now roll out a 3-month action plan to communicate to industry and to farmers on what needs to be done to contain this.
Should neighboring countries to South Africa be concerned, the likes of Lesotho, Swaziland, Botswana as well, Namibia, Zimbabwe?
Yeah, well, I think they've already halted all imports of cattle and meat in any case. Our neighbors in Namibia and Botswana have some of the best biosecurity controls that there is. And that's why they are known as some of the best cattle farmers in the world, because they are able to export to countries like the United States and Europe, because they have a foot and mouth disease free status, because they just have better biosecurity controls than us.
Let's leave it there for now. Francois, we appreciate your time and have a good Tuesday.
Thank you, you too.
That's Francois Rousseau, CEO of Southern Africa Agricultural Initiative, talking to us about foot and mouth disease. Stay with us as we continue with our coverage of news in and around our continent.
Stella Longwe, Pamalonje.
Palitusokoma pano pamalonje kumvera nyimbo za mu Africa kusangalala kupeza moyo akuti kumva moyo kuti kuyenda bwino pano pamalonje ndiyetu apa tili ndikatswiri oyimba ameneyu ndikatswiri wa dziko la Malawi amene akukhala mdziko la South Africa ndipo amayimba amene akuti ndi Big Nick Malawi. Yatusati kuti kodi moyo wanu woyimba ukuyenda bwanji mu Johannesburg?
Moyo woyimba ukuyenda bwinobwino kwambiri, chiliyonse chikutheka ndithu bwinobwino.
Ayi aziboneka yonse chikutheka mofa magrasi anu apa mwaka akuti kumenya yonse aziboneka zona azikutheka ndithu mu Johannesburg.
Malonje pa nthawi ya 6 koloko kufikira 7 koloko madzulo. Lowiruka ndi Stella Longwe, bringing you the energy, news and good vibes to kickstart your day. This is Rise and Shine on Channel Africa.
Now, South Africa's social grant system is once again under intense scrutiny. The Universal Basic Income Coalition, and that's an alliance of civil society organizations, including Black Sash, has written an urgent appeal to South Africa's parliament, warning that new conditions imposed by National Treasury could devastate the country's most vulnerable. Now, these conditions, revealed in a recent parliamentary presentation, would require SASSA to implement harsh and intrusive verification systems across all major social grants, including those for children, the elderly and people with disabilities. The UBIC argue that these measures violate constitutional rights and could lead to the wrongful exclusion of millions of people. Now, the coalition is demanding immediate intervention, transparency around the long-delayed basic income support policy, and also a halt to what it calls the mass digitized denial of life-sustaining income. Well, to unpack some of these issues and concerns and what's at stake, we're now joined by Huda Abrams-Fakar, who's the National Advocacy Manager at Black Sash, and that's one of the key organizations behind this call. Thanks so much indeed for joining us, and welcome to the program.
Thank you for inviting the coalition to share our work.
All right, let's start with this urgent appeal that UBIC has made to Parliament. What's exactly triggered this intervention now?
Well, I think as a coalition, we've been advocating for the social relief of distress grant to become permanent. However, since its inception, there has been challenges with access to the grant. Now, to add to that, a government, or more so National Treasury, wants to create reforms whereby these exclusionary measures that apply to the SRD grant also they want to have applied to other grants. And this will devastate the social grant system. We have high unemployment, inequality and poverty. And people depend on these social grants as a lifeline. So if the SRD grant systems are going to be used, there will definitely be exclusion on high levels.
So talk to us a little bit about some of these conditions that you've described as intrusive and potentially unconstitutional. Explain what these entail and why you consider them so harmful.
Well, the grants are permanent grants, and when someone applies for these grants, they would then qualify and then receive these grants. However, now 210,000 grants have been suspended across the board in terms of these permanent grants. And this involves the fact that they have flagged this as potentially social grant beneficiaries receiving other income. However, in order for this to be flagged, they have done invasive bank surveillance and use of credit bureau data to indicate that these social grant beneficiaries may be receiving income from other sources. However, it is important to note that especially the government databases like UIF and NSFAS are inaccurate and not up to date in real time.
Some might argue that these verification systems are necessary to root out fraud. How would you respond to that?
Well, I think if it's a transparent and open process, if there is a fraud risk, the first option must be that social grant beneficiaries must be informed that there is the surveillance, whether they've been given consent to be able to do that. Secondly, they must be given notice that the grants are going to be suspended. And then furthermore, the SASSA is placing an obligation on social grants to prove to the contrary. However, they're not even sure what the reason is for being flagged. So the process is not transparent and open, and beneficiaries are then having the burden to prove that they still need the grants.
So one of the alarming claims, and it's quite shocking actually, is that up to 90% of SRD grant exclusions since 2022 were actually errors. Is that even possible? What systems are failing here if that's true?
Well, it's an online system. So with an online system, there is not an opportunity for social grant beneficiaries to counter the inaccurate databases that are used. So, for example, students have been excluded from receiving the grant because the NSFAS database is not updated. So they are no longer students, they are unemployed. However, the NSFAS database shows that they are still on the system. So when there's that initial exclusion, there's not an opportunity for that applicant to counter the application, appeal that application in a way to mitigate and submit new evidence. They use those same databases to verify whether that person qualifies for the grant. And this is in line with the fact that every time the budget for this SRD grant is smaller and is aligned with the fiscal constraints on DSD and SASSA. So what happens is the eligibility criteria gets narrower and stricter in terms of the application and eligibility process.
We're also hearing about grant beneficiaries being suspended or placed under review without notice. Tell us about what that might mean for recipients on the ground.
Well, it will mean a lot, obviously, because as I said, to live in the country that we are in now, where unemployment is very high, people depend on this grant as a lifeline. So they expect to receive the monthly grant every month. Although the amount is small, it is still something that they use to pay for their basic needs. And now you suddenly have these grants suspended without notification. They then don't have money to put food on the table and attend to their basic needs. That's the lived reality with this blanket suspension.
All right, we're running out of time, but perhaps a final word in terms of what you see as what must be done.
Well, I think it's important. We've written a letter to the Portfolio Committee on Social Development as the oversight body to really interrogate what is happening, especially the fact that National Treasury is unilaterally introducing these reforms without opportunities for public consultation, where civil society and the coalition can respond to what is being introduced.
That's where we'll leave it. Thank you so much indeed for joining us and pointing out these very important issues. Thanks for your time, Huda.
Thank you so much for having the coalition.
Thank you. That's Huda Abrahams-Faker, who's the National Advocacy Manager at Black Sash, one of the key members of the Universal Basic Income Coalition, with concerns for many grant recipients about some of the acts that are being taken by National Treasury here in South Africa.
Israeli forces have taken command of a charity vessel that had tried to break a naval blockade of the Gaza Strip. The ship was aiming to deliver a symbolic amount of aid to Gaza and raise global awareness of the humanitarian crisis there. Among the 12-strong crew are Swedish activist Greta Thunberg, that is, and Rima Hassan, a French member of the European Parliament. Bunolo Maribe has more.
A footage released showed crew on board a charity vessel that had attempted to break a naval blockade in the Gaza Strip. The boat had been operated by the pro-Palestinian Freedom Flotilla Coalition. It left earlier this month from Italy with a clear aim to deliver humanitarian aid in the besieged enclave. In the video released by the Federal Communications Commission, Swedish activist Greta Thunberg revealed that the boat had been bombed before.
A month after our latest attempt to go on with this mission, the boat was bombed twice. All evidence suggests Israel. And we are doing this because we have to keep our promise to the Palestinians to do everything in our power to protest against the genocide and to try to open up a humanitarian corridor.
Irish activist Liam Cunningham expressed nervousness prior to the Israeli forces' arrival.
We are also very nervous about what the IDF and the Tel Aviv regime will do when they arrive. This boat contains equipment that the Israelis will not allow into Gaza: crutches, baby formula, painkillers, antibiotics.
Israeli authorities called on the military to prevent the vessel from reaching Gaza. Israel imposed a naval blockade on the coastal enclave after Hamas took control of Gaza in 2007. Thunberg has called on the Swedish government to release the crew.
I urge all my friends, family and comrades to put pressure on the Swedish government to release me and the others as soon as possible.
French Foreign Affairs Minister Jean-Noël Barrot says the government is keeping a close eye on these developments.
We have spoken very clearly on this topic. We have 6 French nationals aboard this ship. We gave ourselves a task to warn the Israeli authorities in advance to prevent any incident. By the way, we alerted the members of this crew, the French nationals, in any case of the risks they were exposing themselves to. Since the Israeli authorities boarded this vessel, we requested to be able to exercise what we call consular protection, meaning the protection of our nationals by agents of the French consulate on site. We wish to be able to contact them as soon as they enter Israeli territory in order to allow them to return to France as soon as possible.
Vis-à-vis de nos ressortissants,
the situation in Gaza is the worst since the war between Israel and Hamas started 19 months ago, and the hunger continues to affect scores of residents. I'm Bonolo Maribe, SABC News, Johannesburg.
And it's time now for your news headlines. Here's Jwalane Tulo Ngwefe.
SABC News headlines. The African Perspective.
Thank you, Peter. Good morning. Making headlines, dozens of activists have staged a protest outside a mortuary in Kenya's capital, Nairobi, following the death of a 31-year-old man in police custody. Albert Omondi Ojwang's death has sparked outrage in Kenya. Liberia's former speaker and 3 others of the House of Representatives have been released from prison after paying bail of $440,000. And finally, Sub-Saharan Africa is now home to the world's largest population of Christians, surpassing Europe for the first time. The Pew Research Center said in a new report that as of 2020, 30% of Christians lived in Sub-Saharan Africa versus 22% in Europe. I will have details on these and other stories at 8 o'clock.
SABC News headlines. The African Perspective.
Let's say good morning to Fikile Lingwati with our sports update.
Sports on Channel Africa. The African Perspective.
The Asanda, we kick off with football news. The Malawi Flames will wrap up their Hollywood Bets COSAFA Cup group stage campaign with a must-win. That's a match against Angola at the Toyota Stadium in Bloemfontein today. Following a narrow defeat to Lesotho and a goalless draw against Namibia, the Flames head into the final group stage game determined to secure nothing less than a win. Despite Malawi's failure to win their first 2 matches, assistant coach Peter Mponda has been impressed with the team's progress, noting improvements in performance between the Lesotho and Namibia games. Malawi must win against Angola, while the match between Lesotho and Namibia must end in a draw for the Flames to keep their qualification hopes alive. More football news. Bafana coach Hugo Bros says a win against Mozambique will be important for team's ranking. Bafana will face Mozambique in their second international friendly encounter at Peter Mokaba Stadium in South Africa's Limpopo province tonight. They played goalless draw in their first friendly clash against Tanzania last Friday at the same venue. Bros says he will field a totally different team against Mozambique.
Already it will be a total different team comparing with the team of last Friday. After those two games, we can make a good evaluation of certainly of the young boys, players who were for the first time with us. I want to win against Mozambique, and we have to take in account also a little bit our ranking. We will try everything to win the game, and let's hope we can succeed.
Orlando Pirates defender Nkosinathi Sibisi will captain Bafana against Mozambique. He says they want to win the game to boost their confidence.
For me, it's a privilege and an honor, to be able to lead the team. And I'd like to thank the coach, for showing the confidence in me. We've been together from the very first camp he came, because there were sometimes question marks, whenever I was here. The results, they always matter, as players we always play to win games, and it's really boosted our confidence. We've been on a winning streak for quite some time now. We know if we win, the country is more happier, it's a more safer place for everyone.
On to athletics. Double Olympic champion Beatrice Chebet is now salivating for the 5,000-meter world record after a scintillating victory at the Rome Diamond League. Chebet will take part in the sixth leg of the prestigious competition set for the 12th of June in Oslo, Norway. She believes it is only a matter of time before she runs a sub-14. 25-year-old continued her dominant showing in 2025, clocking an eye-catching 14.0369 seconds to win the women's 5,000 meter, 3 seconds slower than the current world record by Ethiopian Gudav Tegai. Meanwhile, Ethiopia's Hailu Froweni took second place in personal best as Italian Nadia Patokleti clocked a national record to claim the final podium place. Following her dominant run, Chebet leads the Diamond League standings for the women's 5,000 meter with 24 points, 11 ahead of Patokleti. And finally, the former Proteas captain Graham Smith and longtime teammate Hashim Amla were both inducted into the ICC Hall of Fame at a glittering ceremony held at the iconic Abbey Road Studios in London. For any sports stories you'd like to share with us, please send an email to newsroom@channelafrica.co.za or call us on +2711 714 4459. This is Channel Africa Sport with me, Fide Lingwati.
Sports on Channel Africa. The African perspective. Africa at Play with NATO and ETO Chairman.
The Confederation of African Athletics, CAA President Mr. Hamad Kalkaba Malboum, talk to us about the state of athletics in Africa as it stands, and what picture are you looking at 5 years later?
Yeah, athletics in Africa is strong. We are able to organize our major events in time. Like this year, we will have the under-20 and under-18 African Championship in Nigeria. Next year, we will have the senior in Ghana. In 2027, we will go back to Algeria to organize the under-18 and under-20. And then 2028, we will have the senior championship in Gaborone in Botswana. Well, by this program, we can increase our performance. And at the same time, we are considering the fact that within the British Federation, they are identifying young talent every year within the national program, within the scholarship championship. And so the athletics in Africa is in good standard.
Live every Saturday and Sunday from 2 to 5 p.m. Central African Time. Wake up, Africa. Peter Ndoro and Asanda Beda are here to help you rise and shine. Weekdays, 6 till 9 a.m. Central African Time. Only on Channel Africa.
Time now for us to take a look at the world of business, economics, commerce, and taking us through that is Taviso Lihuko.
Business news on Channel Africa. The African perspective.
Thanks, Peter, and good morning. South Africa's President Cyril Ramaphosa will embark on a visit to the Presidential Youth Flagship Programs in Pretoria this morning. Ramaphosa will engage with youth beneficiaries of the Presidential Youth Employment Intervention and Presidential Employment Flagship Programs. He will visit the Sefako Makgatho Primary School in Salisbury, the South African Creative Industries Incubator in Eersterust, and the Foundation for Professional Development in Pretoria East. Sibahle Mota reports.
President Ramaphosa says today's visits will highlight innovative implementation models and public-private partnerships that are delivering dignified high-quality employment and skilling outcomes for the youth. Ramaphosa will interact directly with youth beneficiaries, educators and implementing partners and see firsthand how the programs are reshaping labor market access for the country's most excluded youth.
The South African Reserve Bank is currently working to determine the risk of climate change on the financial sector. Deputy Governor Fundi Chazibana says the central banks don't know enough about the long-term cost of climate change. Dimakato Leshuru has the details.
Climate change adaptation is estimated to cost sub-Saharan African economies between $30 and $50 billion annually over the next decade. This is between 2 to 3% of GDP for the region as it seeks to deal with the effects of climate-related events like drought and floods.
The CEO of the Southern African Agriculture Initiative, Francois Rousseau, says government should take greater measures in dealing with the outbreak of a foot-and-mouth disease. He says if left unchecked, the outbreak will mean that farmers will no longer be able to move their cattle or pay workers' wages. Rousseau says having to order vaccines from other countries shows that South Africa is ill-prepared to deal with veterinary diseases. He added that this will also affect consumers because the price of red meat will go up.
The biggest knock is, of course, immediately to the farmers as they are unable to deliver to this facility, and of course all our exports to China have been immediately halted. This will now cause, in the very short term, increase of red meat onto the shelves, which will mean lower prices in the short term, and then in the longer term, as farmers keep their weaner calves away because of this lack of being able to deliver and the lower prices, it will mean an increase in prices in the longer term.
Farmers say soil moisture is helping the April to September mid-crop in Côte d'Ivoire to develop across most of the main cocoa-growing regions. Côte d'Ivoire, the world's top cocoa producer, is in its rainy season, which runs officially from April to mid-November, when rains are abundant and often heavy. Although beans continued leaving the bush, growers feared a drop in quality. Stocks were buoyant and the dollar remained on guard as the trade talks between the United States and China were set to extend to a second day, with tentative signs that tensions between the world's two largest economies could be easing. US President Donald Trump put a positive spin on the talks in Lancaster House in London, which wrapped up before the night on Monday. Stocks advanced in Asia, extending their rise from the start of the week. Financial indicators at this hour. $1 in Nigeria is trading at 1,000 naira 559. Botswana 13.23. Kenya 128 shilling 41. And Zambia 24 kwacha 76. The BRICS countries in Brazil, the dollar there will cost you 5 ruble 56. Russia 78 rubles 82. India 85 rupees 66. China 71 18. And in South Africa the dollar will cost you 17 rand 72. $1 is trading at 73 pence to the British pound and 87 to the euro. Commodities markets: gold $3,306, platinum $1,216 per ounce, Brent crude oil $67.33 a barrel. For any business stories that you would like to share with us, please send us an email to newsroom@channelafrica.co.za or call us on +27 11 714 4459. For Channel Africa Business in Johannesburg, I'm Thabiso Lohoko.
Business news on Channel Africa. The African Perspective.
Right, it's, what's the time? 7:44 Central African time. Let's take a look at this story, and it takes us to South Africa, where the country is in the process of developing a national entrepreneurship education policy, and this is all in an effort to address the country's high youth unemployment. The country's Department of Basic Education, or Ministry of Basic Education, and its partners are hosting the inaugural policy dialogue in Johannesburg. And the dialogue aims to ignite a cross-sector conversation embedding entrepreneurship education into the basic education system. Nhlanhla Mahlangu reports.
The three-day event, held in partnership with the European Union's Education for Employability E4E program, has brought together government officials, private sector leaders, civil society and academics to brainstorm solutions to the country's education and employment challenges. It aims to explore how entrepreneurial thinking can be integrated into the curriculum at an early age. Dr. Teddy Blecher, National Chairperson of the Employability Entrepreneurship Education Initiative at the Department of Basic Education, says the role of the private sector is critical because that is where jobs get created.
So we know we're sitting with staggering levels of youth unemployment in South Africa, particularly for the ages of 18 to 24, where it's over 62%. And that's the critical age where young people are coming out of the school system. Now the issue is how does the Department of Basic Education work to address this, and how do we produce learners coming out into our economy, either to study further at university or the technicons or things like that, or to go into a job, or to ultimately become entrepreneurs. Now, the private sector plays a critical role there, and in fact, it's only, all key stakeholders in the country have to work together. It is the only way that ultimately we can address this issue of youth unemployment.
ABSA Corporate Citizenship has partnered with the Department of Basic Education to support the policy dialogue. Nonhlanhla Magagula, head of corporate citizenship programs at ABSA Group, says this collaboration is a strategic expression of their commitment to financial inclusion through entrepreneurship. She says they want to address the youth unemployment crisis through an education that empowers learners to be job seekers and job creators.
So our partnership with the Department of Basic Education says, how do you embed entrepreneurship in the CAPS curriculum? Right? Because that embedment or institutionalization of entrepreneurship education in the curriculum means you're able to influence hundreds and thousands of learners who go through basic schooling in our country. Right? You get them exposed to the opportunity to then think and act differently. Curriculum that gets them thinking and acting differently. So this for us is important. So our partnership is about embedment, but embedment is about curriculum, but also about the policy dialogue that's starting today, the conversation that's starting today, because it's about entrepreneurship education policy in our country, particularly from a basic schooling point of view.
The dialogue continues today and will end on Wednesday. Reporting for Channel Africa, I am Nhlanhla Mahlangu in Johannesburg.
Mix Vibration sur Channel Africa.
Révérend Docteur Alain.
Content, très heureux d'être de la partie ce soir et bonjour à tous nos auditeurs.
Je rappelle que pour les intimes, il vous appelle bien sûr BMB. Aujourd'hui, nous parlons courage sur Mix Vibration. Comment définissez-vous le terme courageux?
Ça vient du latin corps, qui veut tout simplement exprimer la bravoure, la force de l'âme, ou encore la virilité, le héroïsme que quelqu'un peut avoir en face de difficultés, en face de problèmes, en face de défis.
Mix Vibration, tous les dimanches de 18h à 19h, temps universel.
Wake up, Africa. Peter Ndoro and Asanda Beda are here to help you rise and shine. Weekdays, 6 till 9 a.m. Central African Time. Only on Channel Africa.
World leaders are attending the UN Ocean Conference in Nice, France, as nations tussle over contentious rules on mining the seabed for critical minerals and the terms of a global treaty on plastic pollution. This comes days after the world celebrated Environment Day with a focus on ending the use of plastics. To speak to us about this, we joined on the line by Director for the School of Climate Studies at Stellenbosch University, Professor Guy Midgley, Stellenbosch University in the Western Cape Province of South Africa. Professor Midgley, thank you so much for joining us, and how are you this Tuesday? Professor Midgley, are you there?
Sorry, it's not Professor Major.
All right.
Hello?
Hello, are you there?
June is Youth Month in South Africa. Celebrate Africa's young voices with us. Channel Africa, the African perspective.
Zilipendwa na Abedi Jean de la Croix.
Kwa nini wanamuziki wengi sana wa kizazi kipya hawafiki mbali pale wanapofanya muziki?
Ni kwa sababu kitu cha kwanza ambacho naweza nikaongelea nikagusia zaidi sana ni kusema kuwa wale wasanii wanapotoa ngoma yao ya kwanza ikiwa kama kahiti kidogo tu, wanaanza kutamba mitaani, wanaonekana kama wapo majuu zaidi sana.
Kuna wanamuziki wengine ambao wanakimbilia kwa waganga wa jadi. Hivi muziki na dawa vinaendana?
Kitu cha kwanza naweza nikasema ni kuwa muziki na dawa haviendani. Lakini muziki ni kipaji.
Kuna watu wengine wanashutumu wasanii wengine kwamba wanaroga.
Wanaroga, wale wasanii kama wanaroga ni kutokujiamini tu. Lakini kitu cha muhimu sana ni kipaji.
Zilipendwa kila Jumamosi kuanzia saa 12 kamili majira ya Afrika ya Kati hadi saa 1 kamili majira ya Afrika ya Kati.
Annika Longi sur Channel Africa.
Nous allons danser au son de Haya, que je dédicace à vous tous, chers auditeurs, qui êtes en train de suivre cette émission Mix Vibration. N'oubliez pas, vous pouvez nous suivre à partir de l'application SABC+. Vous choisissez Channel Africa pour suivre l'émission en direct. Nous allons danser au son de Haya.
Annika Longi, tous les dimanches sur Mix Vibration.
Bringing you the energy, news, and good vibes to kickstart your day. This is Rise and Shine on Channel Africa.
So as we talk at the world celebrating Environment Day, there's a UN Ocean Conference happening in Nice, France, as well as nations tussle over contentious rules on mining the seabed for critical minerals and the terms of a global treaty on plastic pollution. Let's talk to Director for the School of Climate Studies at Stellenbosch University now, Professor Guy Midgley. Professor, thank you for joining us on this Tuesday. How are you?
I'm well, thanks for having me.
Our pleasure. What are the potential impacts? Let's start here in terms of mining rare minerals on the or from the seabed. And do we have similar concerns across the world's shores, or each case needs unique understanding?
Well, each case will need its own unique. So the activities that are conducted are very dependent on context, and different minerals have different implications. I'm no expert in these areas, but in specifically the areas of gas and oil, there are very substantive risks to deep ocean mining.
How should this conference adequately address these, this UN Ocean Conference happening in Nice?
Well, I think these conferences address very big questions around our shared resource, the ocean. 70% of the surface of the world is covered by oceans. And this massive system is a major buffer for climate stability. It moves a massive amount of heat energy around the planet. And it absorbs about 25% of our carbon dioxide that we emit by burning fossil fuels. It also feeds large numbers of people through the vast biomass resources of the oceans. So oceans are absolutely vital for human survival. And short-term extraction of minerals and the dumping of plastic waste into the oceans from our rivers is potentially disastrous for our oceans. And so we've got to balance short-term economic needs with long-term sustainability of the planet.
What are the key topics at this year's conference, and how may these help in mitigating the impact of climate change on deep-sea ecosystems?
Well, one of the key topics is plastic pollution. About 80% of the world's plastic comes from about 1,000 rivers around the world. There are more than 30,000 rivers around the world. So the science helps us focus on areas where the vast majority of the problems are deriving from, which is India, Indonesia, and China. So we know that that's where the vast majority of the world's plastic is coming from, going into the oceans. But remember that some developed countries send their plastic waste to the East to Asia for processing. So the plastic isn't necessarily generated there. It is often dumped there by developed countries through the sending of plastic waste to those countries to deal with it. So these are important issues to identify and to come up with solutions.
Climate change has had a particularly devastating effect on coastal communities on the continent as well as around the world. Is there any saving of the livelihoods of these communities at this point? Because also seabed mining presents significant economic gains.
Well, economic gains for who? Not for the local communities, I can promise you. So gains for the companies that do the extraction, that's for sure. So, we need to actually look out for local communities and their needs, which are more directly dependent on the oceans than these vast international companies that extract resources and take profits away from the countries from which they extract the resources. But climate change is having some effects on coastal communities, but there are not many that have been highly adversely affected by climate. There are some. The most adverse effects are through overfishing and through inappropriate use of those resources. So let's focus on the right things at the right time. And short-term economic benefit is something that needs to be looked at with a great deal of suspicion. And we need to ask ourselves a question, especially in Africa. Who benefits? Who benefits first? And then think about going into these deals.
Right. And as we ask the question of who is really benefiting, and if we're talking about protecting the livelihoods of communities with the topic of fisheries, could some of the damage caused to fisheries because of seabed mining be permanent?
Well, absolutely. I mean, we've seen this happen in certain parts of the world where oil escapes and wells collapse, and we get devastating effects for decades, which are effectively the whole lifetime of certain people. So again, SDG 14 is very clear on protecting these longer-term, protecting communities from these longer-term impacts, planets from these longer-term impacts. We've got to get the economy of the world to interact better with the ecology of the world. Those two things have to work together. We can't have one working against the other. It's and ecology comes first. It has to come first, because ultimately you can't destroy the planet and hope to get economic benefit. That's not going to work.
Yeah. One of the key topics, as you mentioned, of the conference is ending the use of plastic. What does the Global Treaty on Plastic Pollution provide for, and are we sticking to it?
Well, plastic is a huge problem because partly because it's so resilient and it breaks up into these microplastics, which we don't even know how they're going to affect our lives. Microplastics are now found right throughout the food system. There are even microplastics in all of our brains because of the accumulation of this pollution around the world. This is a really emerging issue, and the use of plastics, which is so prevalent around the world, really needs to be looked at very, very carefully, and we need to take action to find alternatives that are less damaging to ourselves and to the planet.
Do governments know enough about the long-term costs of climate change to better inform those decisions that are needed for monetary policies and funding allocations?
Well, it's a tricky question. I think they shouldn't know enough. There's enough information out there on these issues. I don't think the full economic costs are really fully appreciated, and some of the work that's been done by people such as Nordhaus on the economic impacts climate are deeply flawed. So there's a revision of the costs going on all the time. And so some of the costs are much more significant in the shorter term than we thought previously, and as informed by some of those older science pieces of work, which are really outdated and have to be abandoned. So I think the answer is they should, but they do not yet, and hopefully this is going to change quickly.
Talking about policies that are outdated, should there be, as there will be crucial negotiations on the global treaty on plastic pollution as part of the conference, should there be key issues that contribute to changing even this and developing this global treaty on plastic pollution?
Yes, I think there's a lot of weight behind it. Look, most countries of the world depend on the oceans around their shores. And this is one of the issues that really brings the global community together, and I think we should treat it as such. Even landlocked countries depend on the oceans. So I really think SDG 14 is one of the most critical SDGs in the short and medium term. Unlike some of the goals are more long term, and a strong focus on SDG 14 and achieving the objectives of SDG 14 are going to be good for the whole planet in the short and medium term. So it's a great objective to have, and I really fully support what's going on and hope for some good outcomes, and I hope that the declaration that comes out of this conference is going to be strong.
Thanks again for your time, Professor Midgley. We appreciate it. Have a great rest of your Tuesday. All right, Professor Guy Midgley, the Director for the School of Climate Studies at Stellenbosch University, that university in the Western Cape province of South Africa. 8 o'clock Central African time it is. That means we enter the next hour, and it's the final one of Africa Rise and Shine. My name is Asanda Beda. If you've just joined us, and of course, I'm not alone.
Yes, I'm Peter Ndoro. Thanks so much indeed for tuning in to the third and final hour of Rise and Shine, right here on Channel Africa, where we bring you the African perspective, broadcasting from our studios here in Johannesburg, South Africa, on www.channelafrica.co.za. And coming up in this next half an hour, I'm going to be taking a deep dive into the politics and economics of Uganda. And some say that, we're at a crossroads in the country at the moment. We've got elections on the horizon, 2026, and the country has it has its challenges, to say the least, and we'll be unpacking that with a sustainable development analyst and also an economist who will make sense for us of where Uganda is at the moment, politically, economically, particularly ahead of elections next year, and also, of course, this ongoing issue of human rights. And it's a never-ending story.
Right now, let's get our news, though. Here's Jolani Tulongwepe, and then following her will be Fikile Lengwati with our sports headlines.
SABC News. The African Perspective.
Thank you, Asanda. Good morning. Dozens of activists have staged a protest outside a mortuary in Kenya's capital, Nairobi, following the death of a 31-year-old man in police custody. Albert Omondi Ojwang's death has sparked outrage in Kenya. He was arrested following a complaint by the deputy police chief, who accused him of tarnishing his name on social media. In an initial statement, police said that Ojwang sustained head injuries after hitting his head against a side wall while in police custody. However, Ojwang's family lawyer, Julius Juma, said that the body bore signs of physical trauma, including swelling on the head, nose and ears. Kenya's Independent Policing Oversight Authority has launched an inquiry into the death. Liberia's former Speaker and 3 other members of the House of Representatives have been released from prison after paying bail of $440,000. Jonathan Fonti Kofa, Abu Kamara, Dixon Sebo and Jacob Debbie were charged over their alleged role in the burning of the Capitol building last December. All 4 men face several charges, including arson, criminal mischief, attempted murder and other alleged offences. The huge blaze broke out out at the Parliament building a day after plans to remove Kofa as speaker sparked protests in the capital Monrovia. Police valued the damage at $8.6 million. Rwanda has accused the DRC of manipulating other member countries to prevent it from assuming chairmanship of the Economic Community of Central African States. Kigali announced its departure from the regional bloc meant to promote economic cooperation in Central Africa on Saturday, the same day as the latest ECOWAS summit. Speaking in a televised interview, Rwanda's Minister of Foreign Affairs, Olivier Nduhungirehe, says the country could not remain a bystander as the DRC continues to manipulate other member countries, accusing ECOWAS of being dysfunctional.
ECOWAS accepted to be manipulated by a single country imposing its diktat. It's an issue. This is why we decided to pull out, to withdraw from ECOWAS, because we cannot stay in a community that is no more working for the interest of its member states, that is working against the law, and its own law, actually its own treaty, and is working against its intended purpose of economic integration of the region. ECOWAS has been a dysfunctional regional economic community, one of the less effective.
South Africa's Sports, Arts and Culture Minister Gayton McKenzie has announced the reburial of 58 Khoi and San ancestral remains originating from the Northern Cape province. This comes as the department launched Phase 2 of government's repatriation efforts to bring back the remains of South African exiles as well as those of Khoi and San being held outside the country. Minister McKenzie says they are in talks with institutions across the globe to ensure the return of Khoi and San remains to their ancestral home.
For generations, the remains of South Africa's first people, the Khoi, San, and other indigenous groups were stolen from their graves. These ancestors were treated like objects and as objects. They were displayed in museums, studied in labs, and held in foreign institutions without consent or respect. We are correcting those injustices now.
Sub-Saharan Africa is now home to the world's largest population of Christians, surpassing Europe for the first time. The Pew Research Center said in a new report that as of 2020, 30% of Christians lived in Sub-Saharan Africa versus 22% in Europe. They've explained that the shift was caused by a decline in religious support in Europe and a high birth rate in Africa. The BBC's Lebu Diseko has the details.
Christians are still the world's largest religious group, but they are shrinking as a share of the global population. Sub-Saharan Africa is the one region of the world which showed the opposite, with an increase of 0.3% between 2010 and 2020. The centre of Christianity has been moving southwards towards the continent for some time. Numbers of people leaving religion altogether tended to be higher in countries that were more developed.
For any news stories you would like to share with us, please do send an email to newsroom@channelafrica.co.za or call us on +2 711 714 4459. For Channel Africa News, I'm Cholani Tulo Webe.
SABC News. The African Perspective.
Sport headline: Egypt's Al Ittihad and Libya's Al Ahly Tripoli are the first two teams to secure the ticket to the semi-finals of the Basketball Africa League. And Malawi national football team take on Angola in a must-win COSAFA Cup in Bloemfontein today. I'll be back with these and other stories at the bottom of the hour.
Bringing you the energy, news, and good vibes to kickstart your day. This is Rise and Shine on Channel Africa.
So, Uganda is once again at a critical and political and economic crossroads. Now, this past week, in a surprise meeting between National Unity Platform leader Robert Kyagulanyi, better known as Bobby Wine, and Jimmy Akena, who's the leader of Uganda's People's Congress, and the son of former President Milton Obote, has reignited a national debate about the country's political future. This with elections looming in 2026. Questions around coalition building, reform and succession arising in the country. And at the same time, President Yoweri Museveni, who's ruled Uganda for nearly 4 decades now, has, he delivered his 39th State of the Nation address last Thursday, and he painted a picture of resilience and growth, citing Uganda as one of the fastest growing economies in the world, and promised a new and better Uganda. Yet this optimism comes amid ongoing concerns over human rights and governance, especially following Uganda's controversial anti-LGBTQ legislation, which had triggered a freeze on World Bank lending. Now, in a significant turn, the World Bank has also lifted its 2-year ban on loans to Uganda, reopening billions in financing. So what does all of this mean for ordinary citizens, and can Uganda reconcile economic progress with democratic credibility? Well, to unpack these dynamics, both political and economic, we're now joined by Robert Kigongo, who's a sustainable development analyst, as well as Muhire Francis, who's an economist, lecturer at the Makerere University Business School, and also the CEO of Ryoptomal Vision Africa. To both of you, thank you very much indeed for joining us, and welcome to the program.
Thank you, Peter. Glad to be here.
Great. Thanks so much indeed. So maybe we can start with this question. President Museveni highlighted Uganda's position amongst the fastest growing economies, even amid the cuts. From your perspective, how real is this growth, and is it broadly inclusive for all Ugandans? I mean, are they feeling this growth that he describes?
Thank you, Peter. That's a $1 million question. First of all, yes, Uganda has been, having significant growth. Even we saw this before COVID. The economy was growing at least at an average of about 6.5%. And now, even after COVID, we are seeing the rebound, and the picture is really good. But the worrying aspect of this growth is that it is not, inclusive, and that's actually what worries me and most of the people that are trying to follow, this trend. But when you look at the current economic growth, it is majorly driven by increased investments in the petroleum industry. Uganda is going to start commercial production of oil and gas next year, and that's why actually the government, is even having dreams that we might see, increase the GDP by 10-fold in a few years to come. So the main driver of the economic growth we're experiencing as a country is majorly driven by increased investments in oil and gas sector, but also, before we can talk about the oil and gas production, for instance, which is going to start next year, Uganda's economic growth has been driven by a few economic agents. For instance, you have a few players like when you look at the banking sector, you're talking about, let's say, Stanbic Bank. And when it comes to telecommunication companies, you're looking at MTN Uganda and Airtel. Majorly, they are just a handful, economic agents represented by those few mentioned entities I've mentioned that actually have been driving this growth. So the challenge is that the growth is driven by a few, therefore it is not inclusive. And that's what worries me and other people that are following this trend. Yes, Peter.
Okay. All right. Thanks so much indeed. I wonder, Muhire, are you there?
Yes, I'm there.
Okay. All right. So my question to you is, I know that you've analyzed Uganda's economic structure, and we've heard a little bit just now from Robert. The Agriculture, minerals, remittances, are these sectors sustainable?
Well, they are by nature. For instance, if we talk about agriculture, by its nature, it is sustainable. We look at another big foreign exchange earner for the country, which is tourism, that brings about 1.4 billion USD dollars per year. It is sustainable. When it comes to extractives like petroleum, well, we know within about 2 decades, we'll be out of the petroleum. We'll have exploited it all, But when we look at other extractive, let's say gold, recently the government announced, the new discovery of a huge, you're talking about 31 tons of gold. You have other minerals, iron ore, which actually are underexploited. A few that is being exploited is being used, or the extraction is actually through rudimentary ways. Mostly you have non-artisanal, miners, let's say in the gold who are into this. So all these are sustainable. It all depends on how the government, handles the governance part, which is another big debate maybe for another day.
Yeah.
So they are sustainable, but the challenge is, so far, if you look at the natural rate, natural resource rent, is very low compared to the potential as a country. You're talking about natural rate, resource rate, which is at about 6%. Very low compared to the country's, potential. So it's all about, how the government has to change its cards of governance and ensure sustainability by getting the revenue from these natural resources and reinvest them in other avenues that will ensure sustainability, so that not only the current generation benefits, but also the future generations can benefit from these resources.
All right. Robert, thanks for joining us as well. How do we translate this? Robert isn't with us, unfortunately. I'm hoping we can get hold of him in a short while, but let's carry on then, Mohire, a little bit more. Parliament recently passed a contentious bill expanding military court jurisdiction over civilians. What does this signal, do you think, in your view, in terms of Uganda's governance and civic freedoms?
That is a very sensitive matter, but I want to assure you that as you are, for instance, introducing the program, you hinted that President Museveni has ruled Uganda, we are now talking about 40 years. But when you see the changes that are coming in the constitution, the new bills coming on board, they will tell you one thing, that the president is not planning to leave power, and is, for instance, looking at how to extend it to the son, General Muhoozi Kainerugaba. So it is a clear picture that even if Museveni stepped out after 2026 elections, the son is next in line. And that is the picture that I can see from this, and I'm sure a majority of the people can also see that that's where we are headed, as a country.
Most of the observers would say that there seems to be a weakening of the rule of law in the country, and I'm just wondering economically, what kind of impact Uganda's credibility might be having with institutions like the World Bank, especially now that lending has been restored.
When we look at Uganda's governance dimensions, ranging from rule of law, let's say, to government effectiveness, we've not been doing well as a country. And this actually justifies, for instance, to the current position we are as an economy compared to the desired destination we would want to be. So definitely this, kind of poor governance structure, it scares away, for instance, the foreign investors. If you have high levels of corruption, a legit or genuine investor would prefer going to a smaller economy like Rwanda, where he knows that at least the levels of corruption are very low compared to Uganda's economy, which might be bigger, but there is high levels of corruption. So the main impact or negative impact posed by this weak governance is, for instance, scaring away the foreign investors, but also the domestic investors. You have Ugandans who are comfortable, investing in other countries, compared to their countries, but also the corrupt officials from Uganda themselves. Most of them are investing or taking or looting the money, putting it in other economies. So probably they're also aware of this whole weak governance structure. And as we've said, we are heading for general elections next year. And what normally happens during these political or election seasons, we see a lot of investors pulling out their resources from Uganda and invest in other countries, let's say Kenya or Rwanda, because we are not sure. No one is sure of what is going to happen after elections. Remember, Uganda, we've never had a peaceful transition of government. We've never experienced that. So every time we have elections, you have instability. You always watch during campaigns, the agents involved in the electoral process at the presidential level, all the way to L1 chairperson, mostly those from the opposition are harassed. So there's always that instability, and no one knows exactly what will happen after or during the elections. I can assure you that 2 weeks to elections, most of the business close. They close down to wait to see how things turn out. So these are some of the challenges we face as a country, and they are all attributed from the weak or poor governance structures we have as a country.
All right. I want to welcome Robert Kigongo, who's a Sustainable Development Analyst. Robert, thanks very much indeed for joining us, and welcome to the program.
Thank you so much for hosting me. A very, very good morning to the people of Africa, especially for South Africa, East Africa, and the entire Great Lakes region. Happy to be here.
Fantastic. So I began by talking about President Museveni's State of the Nation address. Then he went on about how well the economy is doing, one of the fastest growing economies in the world. And I wonder, as a development analyst, how this macro growth translates into environmental and social benefits at community level. I mean, are things like the parish development model effective for the benefit of people?
Peter, the listeners must know that our economy has grown approximately to $55 billion from $53 billion last year. The president also launched the National Development Plan 4 after National Development Plan 3. It captures the interest and the priorities of agriculture transformation, so on and so forth. But it comes back to the National Development Index, that GDP per person that is recorded by our Minister of Finance and the economy translates into human capital development. I think that's a gap. Largely, Uganda is still right from independence up to now. Some recorded infrastructure growth, a little bit of stability in terms of the currency. It has also grown by 6%. The president took pride of it since we had a World Bank ban due to human rights violation.
All right, Robert, we seem to be struggling with your line a little bit, so I'm going to give you back to my producers, and hopefully we can get you back on a better line. But there does seem to be this conflict between economic growth on the one hand and then human rights on the other. And Muhira, let's talk a little bit about 2026 and looking ahead. The private sector, How are they figuring all of this? You talked about businesses shutting and waiting to see sometimes. What does a private sector do in an environment like this?
Well, the private sector really can't do much apart from, making forecasts or predict and see what is going to happen. But as I already mentioned, that during the active electoral process, during the voting season, most of the private actors, want first hold back, either pull out their capital and invest it in other countries temporarily, or first sit home and wait and see what happens. So the private sector can't really do much apart from just making forecasts. But also, what I want to tell you is that during this season, yes, the government, its forces, the police, and other sister organs, they are in charge. In most cases, they are really trying to put the opposition in order, but of course also have other, actors who want to come in and take advantage of the situation. So the government really tries to ensure stability, because at the end of the day, it wants to make sure that there is, a stability during this whole process. But it is, you can't take actors, the opposition, who never claim that they have been, or they have lost genuinely.
I'm just wondering, regionally, East Africa community, and they see what's happening in Uganda. What's their take on how to deal with President Museveni and Uganda? Is it a kind of, yes, we see, but there's not much we can do? Because the East African community is supposed to be working in harmony in terms of the economies and also the issue of civic rights, human rights, you name it.
Is this for me or Robert?
It's for you. We're struggling to get Robert back on the line.
Okay, Peter. Yeah, so when we look at the East African community, we are now at the integration phase of the common market. We are not yet to the level of, let's say, political federation where we would want to be. So being at that stage of the common market, the EAC member states have little or less in terms of what they can do. But of course, we have the legal system that handles the East African community matters that are beyond one state. But at the moment, the infrastructure available cannot, for instance, go to another country and restrain it. It's constrained. But what is happening in Uganda is not different from what is happening in the other member states. I'm sure if you've been following, you know that we are almost homogeneous in many ways. So the East African community at the moment can't do much until when we get that political federation or the last phase of integration, where we have one foreign policy, where we have one government, then there can be direct intervention. But at the moment, really the EAC member states can't do much, or as a whole infrastructure can't do much. But I'm not saying that there are no avenues or systems in place that are trying to do some good work here and there, but we can do better. For instance, if we attain the political federation as EAC, would be doing much better compared to what we have at the moment.
Robert, I think you're back on the line. What do you reckon are maybe the top three priorities that Uganda should pursue, both in policy and governance, to try and secure an inclusive, sustainable, and democratic future?
Thank you so much, Peter. I hope you can hear me.
Yes, we can.
Sorry about the Zoom late preparations to the viewers, but allow me to convey my message through the audio. I was trying to highlight a minute ago that Uganda's economy stands at approximately 55 billion US dollars, and the president launched actually the National Development Plan 4. It is the National Development Plan that gives the guidance of our priorities, where the direction that the country is taking. And one of them is industrialization, agriculture, commercialization, and exports. So, in terms of governance, that's an area that he actually neglected to mention about. But in my own opinion, I think we need a constitution review to reverse back some of the draconian laws that have been passed recently, including the UPDF Act that has turned into law, including the term limit, the presidential term limit that was removed a while back, then the presidential age limit that was removed in 2017. I think once you collect those impediments, you are able to deal with some of the challenges that we are facing. But overall, it comes back to the citizen to rise up in massive numbers and demand for those changes.
What are your thoughts, Robert, on this coming together of Bobby Wine and Milton Obote's son? Is that a shift in the political landscape, or are we going to see more of the same in the coming year or so?
It's a very, very good gesture that I welcome, and many Ugandans welcomed. Uganda is still largely affected by the issues that we got at the independence and even the post-independence. We had the first president coming from Buganda, the central region, and then we had the Prime Minister Milton Obote coming from the region where Jimmy Akena comes from. And Jimmy Akena is a son to the former president Milton Obote. So there has been a clash between these two ethnicities, the Lango group and then the Baganda group. So the coming together is a very, very good signal that we welcome. It's a wonderful gesture towards unity as we head to the 2026 elections.
All right, and perhaps final thoughts from both of you, very briefly, because we've run out of time. And let me start with you, Muhire. Your hope for Uganda the next year and the next 5?
Well, I'm very positive that something might change, because all we need to work on is
there has been what it stands for.
Carry on, Muhire, we can hear you.
Yeah, so as an economy, we have potential. I agree with the president that we have the potential to actually grow our economy from where it is, about $60 billion to 500 billion in about a half decade. Because we have the potential, the only challenge we need to work on is governance. All the dimensions of governance have to be given attention to. So for me, that's my hope, that even if we get a new government after the Museveni's government, that's the only challenge that can be worked on. Of course, the next person in power, based on the reality on ground, he knows, he's already talking about that the only thing he has to fix is corruption and other, work on other dimensions of governance. So for me, I'm positive that once that is worked upon, then the country will be able to grow, because Uganda is not, has enough policies that can really, spur the economy to the desired destination. Thank you.
And Robert, in 30 seconds, what's your hope? What's the glimmer of light that's ahead for you?
One, it's about unity, Ugandans coming together towards a common goal, and that is the change that we want to see in our livelihoods and also in governance. And it will take everyone to rise to the occasion, not just to leave it to the few elites. You've highlighted the meeting of Jimmy Aken and Robert Chagulanyi. That one is one of the steps that Ugandans should take towards embracing diversity to achieve the goals that we intend to achieve.
All right. Kigongo and Muhere Francis, it's been a pleasure talking to you. Thank you so much. I wish we had more time, but thank you for your thoughts and your insights. Thank you. All right, that was Robert Kigongo, Sustainable Development Analyst, and Muhere Francis, an economist and lecturer at the Makerere University Business School, talking to me about the crossroads that Uganda finds itself at the moment. On the one hand, you've got this seemingly progressive economic story unfolding, but on the other, the challenges with civic freedoms and human rights and elections on the horizon. A little late, but it's time for your news headlines.
SABC News. Headlines. The African Perspective.
Thank you, Peter. Good morning. Making headlines, dozens of activists have staged a protest outside a mortuary in Kenya's capital, Nairobi, following the death of a 31-year-old man in police custody. Albert Omondi Ojwang's death has sparked outrage in Kenya. Liberia's former speaker and 3 other members of the House of Representatives have been released from prison after paying bail of $440,000. And finally, Sub-Saharan Africa is now home to the world's largest population of Christians, surpassing Europe for the first time. I will have details on these and other stories at 9 o'clock.
SABC News. Headlines. The African Perspective.
Time now to check in with the world of sports. Fikile Lingwati is driving that desk. Let's say good morning for the last time on this Tuesday to you, sir.
Sports on Channel Africa. The African Perspective.
Good morning again, Asanda. We begin with the basketball news. Egypt's Al Ittihad and Libya's Al Ahli Tripoli are the first 2 teams to secure the ticket to the semi-finals of the playoffs of the ongoing Basketball Africa League BAL 2025. Al Ahli had to beat Cape Verde's Creole Star to advance to the semi-finals, while Al Ittihad overcame Morocco's FUS Rabat in Pretoria, South Africa, where the playoffs action is unfolding. The BAL quarterfinals continue tomorrow as APR of Rwanda takes on Rivers Hoopers of Nigeria before US Monastir of Tunisia faces Pedro de Luanda of Angola. The partnership between the International Basketball Federation FIBA and the NBA is a professional league featuring 12 club teams from across Africa that completed its 4th season in June 2024. Now, the Malawi Flames will wrap up their Hollywood Bets COSAFA Cup group stage campaign with a must-win, a match against Angola at the Toyota Stadium in Bloemfontein today. Following a narrow defeat to Lesotho and a goalless draw against Namibia, the Flames head into the final group stage game determined to secure nothing less than a win. Despite Malawi's failure to win their first 2 matches, assistant coach Peter Mponda has been impressed with the team's progress, noting improvements in the performance between the Lesotho side and Namibia games. Malawi must win against Angola, while the match between Lesotho and Namibia must end in a draw for the Flames to keep their qualification hopes alive. Bafana coach Hugo Broos says a win against Mozambique will be important for team's ranking. Bafana will face Mozambique in their second international friendly encounter at Peter Mokaba Stadium in South Africa's Limpopo province tonight. They played goalless draw in the first friendly clash against Tanzania last Friday at the same venue. Broos says he will field a totally different team against Mozambique.
We're ready. It will be a total different team comparing with the team of last Friday. After those 2 games, we can make a good evaluation of certainly of the young boys, players who were for the first time with us. I want to win against Mozambique, and we have to take in account also a little bit our ranking. We will try everything to win the game, and let's hope we can succeed.
Let's end with athletics. Double Olympic champion Beatrice Chebet is now salivating for the 5,000 meter world record after a scintillating victory at the Rome Diamond League. Chebet will take part in the sixth leg of the prestigious competition set for the 12th of June in Oslo, Norway. She believes it is only a matter of time before she runs a sub-14. For any sports stories you'd like to share with us, please send an email to newsroom@channelafrica.co.za or call us on +2711 714 4459. This is Channel Africa Sport with me, Figure Ngwati.
Sports on Channel Africa. The African perspective. Africa. It's time to plug into the heartbeat of the continent. Tune in to Channel Africa, your go-to radio station that broadcasts in 5 different languages.
L'Afrique du Sud célèbre la journée nationale.
Kabla hujaitwa kwa jina la Double K,
or more of our forests have been destroyed. Kama kutuli branchi ndi Partido Africano da Independência da Guiné.
Channel Africa represents every corner of this amazing land. From Lagos to Cape Town, Nairobi to Dakar, we've got you covered with the freshest news, music, and cultures. So, turn up the volume, feel the rhythm. Enjoy the conversation. Channel Africa, the African perspective. Wake up, Africa. Peter Ndoro and Asanda Beda are here to help you rise and shine. Weekdays, 6 till 9 a.m. Central African Time. Only on Channel Africa.
And it's time now on Channel Africa to find out what's been happening in the business news for the last time. This morning on Rise and Shine, here is Tabiso Lehuko.
Business news on Channel Africa. The African perspective.
Thanks, Peter, and good morning. Bloomberg reports that the World Bank has approved a $1.5 billion loan to South Africa to support structural reforms aimed at boosting the country's infrastructure. The loan amount will be used to enhance energy security, increase support and rail volumes, and support the shift to a low-carbon economy. Shawn Bryce-Peace reports that a World Bank media liaison refused to share their statement on the loan facility when it was requested by SABC News.
According to a statement from the bank, the loan would address the nation's challenges of low growth and high unemployment by easing constraints in its energy and freight transport sectors. The lender highlighted power generation breakdowns as also curbing growth. The money will go towards Eskom's efforts to bolster the grid for renewable operations and Transnet to support freight transport capacity.
Head of Communication at the South African Department of Basic Education, Elijah Mhlanga, told Channel Africa that young people must gear their energies towards entrepreneurship. This is the inaugural policy dialogue on entrepreneurship education kicked off in Boksburg in Johannesburg, South Africa. The high-level dialogue aims to ignite a cross-sector conversation on embedding entrepreneurship education into the basic education system. Mhlanga says with the emergence of artificial intelligence, budding entrepreneurs have to take advantage of the status quo.
This dialogue is very important because we need to now focus as a country on entrepreneurship, not just learners who are going to be employees. We need now to say what is it that we need to do to make sure that we equip our young people for the future world of work.
The South African Reserve Bank is currently working to determine the risk of climate change on the financial sector. Deputy Governor Fundi Chazibana says central banks don't know enough about the long-term costs of climate change. Dimakazo Leshuru reports.
Climate change adaptation is estimated to cost sub-Saharan African economies between $30 and $50 billion annually over the next decade. This is between 2 to 3% of GDP for the region as it seeks to deal with the effects of climate-related events like drought and floods.
Mauritius Prime Minister Dr. Naveen Ramgoolam has presented a recovery-focused budget to tackle high public debt and trade deficits. The plan centers on spending cuts, increased tax on high earners and big firms, and pension reforms, raising eligibility to 65. The gross domestic product is expected to grow by 3.7%, with the debt slightly reduced. The government is banking on 3 years of austerity to restore economic stability. The US dollar is steady in tight trading as Washington and Beijing remained locked in trade talks that left investors on edge and hesitant in placing major bets while looking ahead to US inflation report later in the week. Top economic officials from the world's two largest economies sought to diffuse a bitter dispute that has widened from tariffs to restrictions over rare earths, with the trade talks extending to a second day in London. The talks come after US President Donald Trump and Chinese President Xi Jinping spoke by phone last week, and at a crucial time for both economies, which are showing signs of strain from Trump's cascade of tariff orders since January. $1 in Nigeria is trading at 1,000 naira 459. Botswana 13.23, Kenya 128 shilling 41, and Zambia 24 kwacha 76. The BRICS countries in Brazil, the dollar will cost you 5 ruble 56. Russia 78 rubles 82. India 85 rupees 66. China 7 yuan 18, and in South Africa the dollar will cost you 17 rand 72. $1 is trading at 73 pence to the British pound and 87 to the euro. Commodities markets, gold is trading at $3,306 and platinum $1,216 per ounce. Brent crude oil $67.33 a barrel. For any business stories you would like to share with us, please send us an email to newsroom@channelafrica.co.za or call us on +27 11 714 4459. For Channel Africa Business in Johannesburg, I'm Thabiso Lohoko.
Business news on Channel Africa. The African perspective.
Zilipendwa na Abedi Jean de la Croix.
Kwa nini wanamuziki wengi sana wa kizazi kipya hawafiki mbali pale wanapofanya muziki? Ni kwa sababu kitu cha kwanza ambacho naweza nikaongelea nikagusia zaidi sana ni kusema kuwa wale wasanii wanapotoa ngoma yao ya kwanza ikiwa kama kahiti kidogo tu, wanaanza kutamba mitaani, wanaonekana kama wapo majuu zaidi sana.
Kuna wanamuziki wengine ambao wanakimbilia kwa waganga wa jadi. Hivi muziki na dawa vinaendana?
Kitu cha kwanza naweza nikasema ni kuwa muziki na dawa haviendani. Lakini muziki ni kipaji.
Kuna watu wengine wanashutumu wasanii wengine kwamba wanaroga.
Wanaroga wale wasanii, kama wanaroga ni kutokujiamini tu. Lakini kitu cha muhimu sana ni kipaji.
Zilipendwa kila Jumamosi kuanzia saa 12 kamili majira ya Afrika ya Kati hadi saa 1 kamili majira ya Afrika ya Kati.
Embrace our young voices. This month, Channel Africa, celebrating Youth Month.
Annika Londi sur Channel Africa.
Nous allons danser au son de Haya, que je dédicace à vous tous, chers auditeurs, qui êtes en train de suivre cette émission Mix Vibration. N'oubliez pas, vous pouvez nous suivre à partir de l'application SABC+. Vous choisissez Channel Africa pour suivre l'émission en direct. Nous allons danser au son de Haya.
Annika Londi, tous les dimanches sur Mix Vibration.
Wake up, Africa. Ndoro and Asanda Beda are here to help you rise and shine. Weekdays, 6 till 9 a.m. Central African Time. Only on Channel Africa.
Overcrowding, old and outdated infrastructure, and poor alignment with modern correctional goals continue to challenge prison systems in many African countries. To address this, the Namibian Correction Service, supported by the International Committee of the Red Cross and the African Correctional Services Association, are hosting a regional workshop on prison infrastructure in Africa in Windhoek, Namibia this week. Those attending the event will share insights for designing and maintaining prison infrastructure that encourage rehabilitation and humane treatment. To talk to us on this further, we're joined on the line by Jean-Marcel Kavaruganda from the International Committee of the Red Cross, or the ICRC. Jean, thank you for joining us and making time for us on this Tuesday. How are you?
Morning. I'm fine. Do you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you clearly. Thank you. Briefly take us through the significance of this workshop and what led to its formation or the hosting of it.
As you said, this workshop is organized by the ICS International Committee of the Red Cross in conjunction with Namibian Correctional Service and AXA. The main objective is because ICS believes that only the use of detention should be as a last resort, because that alternative for detention can be used before. And it's not systematically to use detention. But if you have now to use detention, we need infrastructures. And mainly as population are growing, we need also to plan. But first, we need to evaluate and reform current detention policies and practices, is where now we can work and to help the prison authorities, because for the time being, the majority in African countries, prison authorities are managing prison from built from the colonial period. And we need now to update, to construct the new prisons. That is the main reason. And the objective is just expert and practice in this field. And it's an opportunity also to talk, to have interest on prison center for discussions.
In prison centers, overcrowding is one of the major issues. It's a serious challenge, and it's an issue that formulates itself before, even within the prison walls. So proactively, how do we deal with delays in court proceedings, which are the basis of this problem?
Yeah, you are right. Prison overcrowding in Africa remain a reality. And currently, the average occupancy rate is more than 170%. But in some areas, it's even more. We can just meet 300, 400% of occupation rate. And now this cannot be done without an efficient judicial system, because this is one of the points which puts more pressure on prison infrastructure and for authorities. Because if you don't have enough infrastructures, it means that you are going to use the same cells, the same toilets, which are already planned for maybe 20 people, and they are used by 40 people. This is a high pressure. It's the reason why for the penitentiary system, we need also to work with judicial and with auto judicial system, because it's the one who is bringing people in the prison. The reason why what I said in the beginning, prison should be only be used as last reasons and not automatically the fact. We should just explore other alternatives.
And we'll touch on that in terms of exploring other alternatives to imprisonment. But you touch on infrastructure, and in your assessment, is the challenge that we begin with infrastructure that's adequately put up, but then after some time it wears and tears and there's no maintenance of it? Or do we start with inadequate infrastructure, even in the beginning, with our prisons?
Yeah, adequate infrastructure should start from the beginning for the design. It's the reason why ICLC is supporting, working with the detention authorities, because if you start your design, planning and design is the first point to make sure that your infrastructure, your facility will be used properly and taking into account operational and maintenance. Because mainly in Africa, we are working in prison where we have interaction between staff and inmates. And this has to be integrated in our planification, in our design, because the prison is not only for punishment, it's also for rehabilitation. If this is not taken into account, to have some workshops, to have some clinics, to have other activities, internally alphabetization, this kind of activities, this will help for rehabilitation of people. And our main objective is just to bring back those people in the society and not to keep them in prison as punishment. Once they finish their punishment, they should come back to the society without any other issue.
Prison officials are often overlooked when we're talking about these topics. So what are the challenges that the meeting may tackle when it comes to what they deal with on a daily?
Sorry, come again?
Let's talk about prison officials because we talk a lot about the infrastructures and we talk about the inmates, but they may be overlooked sometimes when we talk of these topics. What are the challenges that the meeting is going to tackle when it comes to what they deal with on a daily and what they are challenged with? The warders and
you are
such.
Right. The human resources is one of the big challenge for Africa. Everywhere this is a common problem. Because we don't have enough staff, we don't have enough trainings, and one of the solution is just to make trainings, to have people who knows technician people, like for operation and maintenance. We need psychologists, we need people who can just talk to the detainees, we need medical staff. These all people, this is one of the weakness for our system in Africa. It's one of the issue also ICC would also to work on it with different authorities, because it's not only to talk, as you said, about infrastructures. When I checked from the last, according to data we received from a previous workshop, in 25 countries, representing approximately 65% of African prison population, we have near 500 new prisons which have been built in the last 10 years, or which are planned for the next 5 years. 500 new prisons. If you don't plan at the same time to have human resources to train them and to keep them, it will be a challenge just to have a correct management. It's one of the reasons ICC is pushing also to support authorities.
And then you touch on alternatives to imprisonment. Can these prove effective in the African context? And what could we use as alternatives to imprisonment in dealing with the challenges of overcrowding, inadequate infrastructure, and safety concerns for prison officials or warders?
Yes, why not? You know, in general, in Africa, before we didn't have prisons. Prison is something which happened with colonial period. It's not really in African way. Before, it was possible if someone make a mistake to be treated, to be brings in the community to show him that what was done, it was not good. Maybe you can do alternative works, public work to support people. You can also maybe pay, or according to the culture, it was always in the village we find a solution without putting someone in jail or also deprived to stop his rebellion. No.
So it's possible. Let's go back to the way we used to do things. Fines, as you say, or rehabilitation in the form of community work and service and volunteering. But let's leave it there for now, Jean, because we are completely out of time. But we thank you again for making time to talk to us this morning.
Thanks a lot, and see you next time.
Great. Jean Masao Kavaruganga is from the International Committee of the Red Cross. And coming up after Rise and Shine, we have On the Move, and Palisa is joining us in studio to tell us what we can expect on this Tuesday, the 10th of June. Good morning.
Good morning. How are you guys?
Good, thank you. How are you?
Doing good. Very cold. Yeah, absolutely. Well, we'll be speaking to Dr. Anthony Ajay, who's a leading researcher at the African Population and Health Research Center in our first hour of the show. He's going to be part of an upcoming webinar titled Ending Mistreatment and Building Dignity for Adolescents During Childbirth. And we know that, teenage pregnancy, adolescent pregnancy is a big issue all across the African continent alike, and this webinar focuses on making sure that adolescents who do give birth are treated fairly, are treated well, and aren't abused in that particular health system. So we're going to be unpacking that in the first hour. We go in the cubicle in our workplace feature in the second hour of the show, and today we're speaking about verification of your CV. I mean, people love it. It looks nice. It can look nice and fancy, but is it all true? Are all the things in there 100% true, especially because now people have learned the AI system of taking whatever's on the job description and making it a part of your CV, but is that 100% accurate?
And then they'll put their cousin as a reference.
Exactly.
Someone who might have been a cleaner at the airport will say I was in aviation.
Exactly. yeah. You were not in aviation. We're speaking to HR specialist Thando Dingi, as well as the founder and CEO of a new app called Span, a verification-led employment platform. His name is Afika Nonso. Moving on to our final hour, it's a Money Matters feature. And today we're speaking about, teaching children about finances in the different stages of their lives, but also helping them navigate financial risks.
That's very important.
Should be standard.
Yeah.
Primary school, high school, as a compulsory subject for everybody.
But in the home as well.
Yeah.
You have to get the practical knowledge.
Because they need to watch by example. If the parents are not
most
financially
parents
literate,
are useless at it actually. Most parents.
So the home is quite an important place. When you said teenage childbirth, I thought you mean like teenagers who have parents who decide to have kids later.
No.
And do you mean teenage pregnancy? Okay, now I get it. All right,
that's it. We're done. Have a great day. Peace.
Goodbye, everybody. I'm Asanda Beda.
And I'm Peter Ndoro. Word.
SABC News. The African Perspective.
Top stories: Asawa, dozens of activists have staged a protest outside a mortuary following the death of a 31-year-old Kenyan man in police custody and a huge drug bust in Mexico. Good morning, I'm Jolani Tulongwebe. Dozens of activists have staged a protest outside a mortuary in Kenya's capital, Nairobi, following the death of a 31-year-old man in police custody. Albert Omondi Ojwang's death has sparked outrage in Kenya. He was arrested following a complaint by the deputy police chief, who accused him of tarnishing his name on social media. In an initial statement, police said that Ojwang sustained head injuries after hitting his head against a police cell wall while in custody. However, Ojwang's family lawyer Julius Juma said that the body bore signs of severe physical trauma, including swelling on the head, nose and ears. Kenya's Independent Policing Oversight Authority has launched an inquiry into his death. Liberia's former speaker and 3 other members of the House of Representatives have been released from prison after paying bail of $440,000. Jonathan Fornati Kofa, Abu Kamara, Dixon Sibue and Jacob Debi were charged over their alleged role in the burning of the Capitol building last December. All 4 men face several charges, including arson, criminal mischief, attempted murder and other alleged offences. The huge blaze broke out at the Parliament building a day after plans to remove Kofa as Speaker sparked protests in the capital, Monrovia. Police value the damage at $8.6 million. The High Court in Johannesburg, South Africa, will hear arguments